Professor Claire Whitmore snatched the chalk from Marcus's hand before he could finish writing. She grabbed his arm hard enough that the graduate students in the front row went silent. "Stop," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You do not touch my board." She threw the chalk on the floor. In front of 200 people, in front of cameras, in front of everyone. Then she turned to the audience and laughed. "The janitor thinks he can solve my research equation." The room laughed with her. She had no idea she had just made the worst mistake of her career. And she had no idea the man she just humiliated was about to prove it. And before we go any further, if you're watching this right now, drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button and stay with us all the way to the end. Because this story, it gets so much deeper than you think. Marcus Reed had been mopping floors at Whitmore University for 11 years. 11 years of arriving before sunrise. 11 years of emptying trash cans outside offices where people with fancy titles made decisions about the future of mathematics. 11 years of walking through hallways lined with portraits of distinguished professors, none of whom had ever learned his last name. Most of the faculty called him the janitor. A few called him Hey You. One assistant professor, a young man named Dr. Preston, called him Buddy in the way people say buddy when they mean something much less friendly. Marcus never corrected any of them. He just pushed his cart, cleaned his hallways, and kept his mouth shut. But at night, when the building emptied out and the last graduate student finally shuffled home, Marcus did something nobody at Whitmore University knew about. He stayed. Not to clean, not to fix anything, not because someone asked him to. He stayed because the mathematics department's lecture hall had the biggest blackboard in the entire building. And after 11 years, Marcus had learned that the security guard on the north wing took a 30-minute break at exactly 10:45 every evening. 30 minutes was enough time. He would walk to the board, pick up a piece of chalk from the tray, and begin. Not copying problems from textbooks, not practicing old homework assignments. Marcus Reed was working on his own research. Equations that lived in his head the way music lives in a composer's head, always there, always unfinished, always calling for attention. He kept a collection of notebooks in his maintenance locker, tucked behind a box of industrial cleaning supplies, and an old gray sweatshirt. The notebooks were filled from cover to cover with his handwriting. Dense, careful, precise. The margins were packed with corrections and alternative approaches. Some pages had been crossed out so many times the paper had worn thin. To anyone who found them without knowing Marcus, those notebooks might have looked like the obsessive scribbling of a man who had lost his mind. To anyone who understood mathematics, they would have recognized something much more dangerous. Original thinking. Marcus had been a student once. A long time ago, in a different version of his life. He had sat in rooms exactly like the ones he now cleaned, surrounded by students who argued passionately about proofs and theorems and the nature of numbers. He had been good, not just good. He had been the kind of student that professors talked about after class, the kind they sent emails about to colleagues at other universities, the kind who made other students nervous because his intuition was almost unnervingly fast. But that life had ended on a Tuesday in November 17 years ago. His mother had gotten sick. Not the kind of sick that gets better with rest and medication. The other kind, the slow kind that takes everything from a family before it finally takes the person. Marcus had been in the middle of his final year of graduate research at MIT when the call came. He packed a single bag, told his advisor he needed a few weeks, and drove home to Baltimore. The few weeks became a few months. The months became a year. By the time his mother passed, Marcus had been away so long that his position at MIT had been quietly filled by someone else. His advisor had retired. His funding had dissolved. The research he had been working on existed only in his notebooks and in his own head. He spent 2 years trying to find his way back into academic mathematics. He wrote letters, he sent emails, he applied for positions at universities across the country. The responses, when they came at all, were polite and brief. "We appreciate your interest. We are looking for candidates with more recent academic experience. We wish you well in your future endeavors." What they meant was, "We don't know who you are anymore, and we don't have time to find out." So Marcus Reed took the job at Whitmore University. Not because he wanted to clean lecture halls, but because the maintenance position came with health insurance and a consistent schedule, and because working inside a university meant that even if the academic world had closed its doors to him, he could still smell the chalk dust. He could still hear the arguments through the walls. He could still feel, in some small and painful way, like he was close to the thing he loved. That had to be enough. For 11 years, it had been enough. And then came the afternoon of October the 14th. Marcus was mopping the floor outside Lecture Hall B when he heard the argument start. He recognized the voices Professor Whitmore and 2 of her graduate students, a young woman named Brianna and a young man named Ethan, who both had the particular kind of confident loudness that came from never having been truly wrong about anything important. "The proof holds," Brianna was saying. "I checked it 3 times. "It does hold," Professor Whitmore agreed. "Look at the transition between the 3rd and 4th step. What did I tell you last week about boundary conditions?" Marcus slowed his mopping. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop. He was just close enough to hear, and what he was hearing made his hand stop moving of its own accord. Because there was a mistake in what they were describing. Not a small mistake, not a typo or a misremembered formula. A fundamental error in the logical structure of the proof, the kind of mistake that looked invisible when you were moving quickly, but became obvious the moment you stopped and looked at the foundational assumptions. Marcus knew this because he had made the same mistake himself once, 15 years ago, and his MIT advisor had caught it in about 30 seconds and written a single sentence in the margin of his paper that Marcus had never forgotten. "Check what you're assuming before you check what you're proving." He stood in the hallway for a moment. He told himself to keep walking, to push his cart to the next hallway, do his job, go home. He told himself this 3 times. Then he walked through the door. The lecture hall felt different when he entered it, as something other than a cleaner. He was aware of the way Brianna looked up at him with a particular expression people use when they see someone in the wrong room. He was aware of Ethan's slight frown, the automatic recalibration people do when their environment includes someone unexpected. Professor Claire Whitmore turned to face him with the look of a woman who is about to ask a custodial question. "Can I help you?" she said. Marcus pointed at the board. Specifically, he pointed at the 3rd line of the proof, where the error lived. "Your boundary condition in step 3, he said. "You're assuming the function is continuous across the full interval. But the original equation has a singularity at x equals -2. If you don't account for that, the transition to step 4 doesn't hold." The room went very quiet. Brianna looked at the board, then at Marcus, then at the board again. Ethan made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a scoff. Professor Claire Whitmore tilted her head very slightly. The way a person does when they have heard something they did not expect and are trying to decide how to categorize it. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "Do you understand what you just said?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Could you explain it?" "The singularity at -2 means the function breaks down at that point. You can't treat the interval as continuous through that region without either splitting the domain or explicitly defining the boundary behavior. Right now, the proof assumes continuity that doesn't exist, which means the conclusion in step 4 is built on a foundation that has a crack in it." The silence in the room was different now, heavier. Claire walked back to the board. She looked at the equation for a long time. Her finger traced the line Marcus had identified. Brianna was holding very still. Ethan had stopped making sounds entirely. Claire picked up an eraser and wiped the third step clean. She rewrote it slowly, this time explicitly defining the boundary behavior at -2. Then she worked through the transition to step 4. It took her 4 minutes. When she finished, she stood with her back to Marcus for a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned around. "You're right," she said. The 2 words landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. "It was a small mistake," Brianna said quickly. "Professor, you would have caught it on the next pass." "I've been looking at this proof for 3 days," Claire said, and her voice was very controlled. "I would not have caught it on the next pass." She looked at Marcus. "What's your name?" "Marcus Reed." "How long have you worked here, Marcus?" 11 years. She looked at him the way scientists look at data that doesn't match their hypothesis. Not with hostility, with a particular kind of careful, uncomfortable curiosity. "Where did you study?" she asked. Marcus paused just a moment. "I studied mathematics at MIT, graduate program. I left before finishing my doctorate." Ethan let out a breath that was definitely a laugh this time. Brianna shot him a sharp look. Claire's expression didn't change. "Why did you leave?" "Personal reasons." She held his gaze for another second. Then she nodded once and turned back to the board. "Thank you," she said. "You can go." Marcus picked up his mop and left. In the hallway, his hands were shaking, not from nerves. From something he hadn't felt in a very long time. The feeling of having been heard. It lasted about 30 seconds before the other feeling arrived. The one he was more familiar with. The feeling of watching a door close before you can get your foot through it. He pushed his cart down the hallway and tried not to think about the look on Claire Whitmore's face. The look that said, interesting. The look that said, but also impossible. The look that said, I don't quite know what to do with you. He'd seen that look before. In a different building, a different hallway, a different lifetime. He kept walking. That evening, Marcus sat in the break room eating a sandwich and reading through one of his notebooks when the department's secretary, a warm older woman named Patricia, who actually did know his last name, dropped a flyer on the table beside him. "Did you see this?" she said. "They're announcing the big math competition. The national one. Claire's running it again this year." Marcus picked up the flyer. Whitmore University National Mathematics Challenge. Open to graduate students and academic researchers. Prize, major research grant, and fellowship placement. "Big deal, huh?" Patricia said. "They fly in people from all over. Harvard, MIT, Yale, real hotshots." "Yeah," Marcus said. "It sounds like a big deal." He set the flyer down and finished his sandwich. He did not think about it again that night. At least, that's what he told himself. 3 days after the lecture hall incident, the mathematics department held what they called a public demonstration, essentially a showcase event where graduate students and professors gave informal presentations to an audience of undergraduate students, faculty, and a handful of invited guests. Marcus had been assigned to the event to handle the setup and breakdown. Chairs to arrange, a microphone system to check, coffee and water to keep stocked. He was refilling a water pitcher near the back of the room when the demonstration took its first unexpected turn. Professor Daniel Kwan, one of the younger faculty members, was walking through an introduction to a complex optimization problem. A problem Marcus recognized from a branch of mathematics he had spent considerable time with in his own notebooks. Kwan set the problem up clearly, but when he reached the solution methodology, he began leading the audience through an approach that was technically valid but dramatically inefficient. The kind of approach that worked but required enormous computational overhead, the kind that made problems feel harder than they needed to be. Marcus heard it. He felt it the way musicians feel when someone plays a technically correct note at entirely the wrong moment. He was not going to say anything. He was genuinely not going to say anything. And then one of the undergraduate students in the front row said, "Is that the only way to solve it? It seems really complicated." And Professor Kwan said, "Yes, I'm afraid this class of problems doesn't lend itself to simpler approaches." And Marcus, from the back of the room, heard himself say, "Actually, it does." The room turned, 20-something face, 3 faculty members. Professor Kwan, who looked surprised but not unfriendly. And in the 3rd row from the front, sitting very still with a coffee cup halfway to her mouth, Professor Claire Whitmore. Marcus felt the familiar heat of a room's attention and made the calculation he always made in these moments. Too late to take it back. Might as well finish what you started. The problem has a natural symmetry that most approaches don't use, he said, walking slowly toward the front of the room. If you rotate the perspective, he paused. May I? Kwan stepped aside with a gesture that said, by all means. Marcus picked up a marker and went to the whiteboard. He wasn't thinking about the room anymore. He was thinking about the problem. He always thought better about problems than about people. He worked through it in about 4 minutes. The approach he used was not flashy. It was not the kind of thing that made people gasp with its elegance. It was the mathematical equivalent of a person who knows a city well enough to show you the back roads, not because the highway is wrong, but because the back road is faster and more interesting and gets you to the same place with half the frustration. When he finished, he capped the marker and stepped back. Professor Kwan looked at the board for a moment. He started. That's actually quite elegant. Is that right? Said someone in the front row. It's correct, Kwan said, and significantly simpler. The undergraduate students were whispering. Some of them were nodding. One young woman in the 2nd row was scribbling in her notebook furiously. And in the 3rd row, Claire Whitmore had set down her coffee. She was looking at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. A beat later, a graduate student near the back, the same Ethan from the lecture hall 3 days ago, made a sound that was unmistakably dismissive. Ethan said, loud enough to be heard by most of the room, "It's a cute trick. But it's not like it generalizes. You couldn't apply that approach to the actual hard problems." The room's energy shifted. Marcus recognized this too. The moment when someone redirects the spotlight by questioning the source. Professor Kwan frowned slightly at Ethan, but said nothing. Marcus said calmly, "Which hard problems were you thinking of?" Ethan blinked. He had not expected to be answered directly. "The class of problems my thesis addresses," he said, recovering quickly. "Multidimensional optimization with non-convex constraints." "Your thesis on the Riemannian manifold approach?" Another silence. "A different kind. How do you know what my thesis is on?" Ethan asked. "Department newsletter," Marcus said. The title was in the fall issue. "I read it while cleaning the faculty lounge." Someone laughed. It was not unkind laughter. It was the laugh of people watching a scene they hadn't expected. Ethan's jaw tightened, and Claire Whitmore stood up. She walked to the front of the room with the deliberate pace of someone who has decided something. She took the marker from the whiteboard tray, uncapped it, and began writing. What she wrote was not a simple equation. It was not a textbook problem. It was something from her own research, long, dense, thorny with complexity. The kind of problem that made graduate students take slow, preparatory breaths. The room watched her write. When she finished, she turned to face Marcus, and the expression on her face was not the careful, uncomfortable curiosity from 3 days ago. It was something else, something more complex, something that had a sharp edge under it. "Fine," she said. Her voice was clear and carried to every corner of the room. "Solve this equation and I'll marry you." The room exploded. Laughter, the warm, relieved laughter of an audience that has been given permission to treat something as a joke. Graduate students grinning, undergraduates looking at each other with wide eyes. Professor Kwan suppressing a smile. Claire smiled too. A small, tight smile. The smile of someone who has made a clever move on a board game. She held out the marker. The joke was complete. The janitor would decline, embarrassed. Or he would attempt it and fail, which would prove the point she'd been trying to make since he walked into her lecture hall 3 days ago. Either way, the room would remember this. And the next time Marcus Reed decided to correct a professor in front of a classroom, he would remember the laughter. Marcus looked at the equation on the board. He looked at it for a long moment, and then he took the marker from her hand. The laughter didn't stop immediately. It took a few seconds, the way a tide doesn't reverse direction, the instant the wind changes. People were still smiling, still exchanging glances, still expecting the punchline to arrive in the form of an embarrassed shrug. But Marcus had already uncapped the marker, and he was already writing. He did not write slowly and carefully, the way someone trying to appear confident writes. He wrote the way people who are genuinely thinking write, stopping sometimes, backing up, trying one path, and then redirecting. Real mathematics, not a performance of mathematics. His hand moved across the board, and the room began to realize, one person at a time, that something was happening that had not been scripted. Ethan stopped smiling first, then the other graduate students. Then the undergraduates, one by one, as something in the atmosphere of the room shifted from amusement to attention. Professor Kwan had moved closer to the board without seeming to notice he had done it, and Claire Whitmore stood very still in the center of the room, watching every line Marcus wrote, her coffee forgotten in her hand, her smile gone so completely that it was hard to believe it had ever been there. Marcus worked for 7 minutes. He did not ask for more chalk. He did not erase and start over. He did not look at the room once. His entire attention was on the board, and the board became something else under his hands, not a performance space, not a lecture hall prop, but an actual working surface where an actual solution was emerging. When he finished, he stepped back and capped the marker. He looked at what he had written, checked 2 of the transitions, added a brief clarification in the margin, then he turned around. The room was silent in a way that rooms are not usually silent. Not the polite silence of an audience waiting for what comes next. The stunned silence of people processing something they did not expect. Claire walked to the board. She stood in front of Marcus's solution and she read it. Not quickly. She read it the way you read something when you're looking for the mistake, when you need there to be a mistake, when the alternative is something you are not prepared to accept. She checked the first transition. She checked the second. She worked through the critical third step, where the most dangerous assumption lived. She traced the logic of the final approach. She read the whole thing twice. Then she stood with her back to the room for a moment that stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. When she turned around, her face was very controlled. "It's correct," she said, 3 syllables, flat, professional. But Marcus had spent 11 years learning to read the things people's bodies said when their voices said something else. And what Claire Whitmore's body said in that moment was something much closer to, "I don't know what just happened, and I don't know what to do with it, and I am not ready for this." And something else beneath even that, something she hadn't named yet herself. The room erupted. This time the noise was different. Undergraduates on their feet. Someone clapping. The young woman with the notebook laughing with her hand over her mouth. Professor Kwan looking at Marcus with an expression of frank, open admiration. And then someone's phone appeared. Then another. The video had already started. Marcus handed the marker back to Claire. Their fingers did not touch. He looked at her for exactly 1 second. She looked back at him for the same second. Then he walked to his cart near the back of the room, picked it up, and left the way he had come in. He had mopping to finish in the East Corridor. The video was posted to 3 different social media platforms before Marcus reached the hallway. By the time he had finished the East Corridor and started on the North Stairwell, it had been shared 400 times. By morning, it had been seen by more than 2 million people. The comments were everything and also nothing. People who had never held a piece of chalk in their adult lives were debating the nature of mathematical genius. People who had never mopped a floor were making confident declarations about the academic system. People were arguing about fairness and intelligence and class and opportunity. Nobody asked Marcus what he thought. Nobody had his contact information. He found out about the video from Patricia, who showed it to him on her phone the next morning with an expression on her face that managed to be simultaneously proud and worried. "You're famous," she said. "I'm not famous," Marcus said. 2 million views, she said. 2 million people watched a janitor do math, Marcus said. "That's not the same as being famous. That's being an interesting thing that happened." Patricia looked at him for a moment. "You should be careful," she said. "People like interesting things that happened until they get complicated." Marcus thought about that for the rest of the day. He was thinking about it that afternoon when his supervisor, a tired man named Glenn, who was primarily concerned with floor maintenance schedules and supply orders, called him into the small office near the loading dock. Glenn was sitting across from someone Marcus had not expected, Professor Claire Whitmore. She was wearing a different jacket than she'd worn at the demonstration. Her hair was pulled back more tightly. She had a folder in her lap and was holding it with both hands in a way that suggested the folder was doing some work for her, giving her something to hold on to. "Marcus," Glenn said carefully, "Professor Whitmore wanted to talk to you." "I can see that," Marcus said. He sat in the empty chair. Claire looked at him directly. She had eyes the color of dark coffee and the particular directness of someone who has spent their career being the most prepared person in the room. "I want to invite you to participate in the National Mathematics Challenge," she said. Marcus waited. "It's open to academic researchers and graduate students," she continued. "But the official rules allow for petitioned entries from candidates with demonstrated mathematical capability." "And you want to petition my entry?" Marcus said. "Yes." He watched her. "Why?" The question landed clearly, and Claire's jaw moved slightly as she considered how to answer it. "Because what you did yesterday was—" She stopped. Started again. "Because the video has drawn significant public attention to this institution and this competition. And because—" "I don't need the official reason," Marcus said. "I'm asking why you personally want me in that competition." The room was quiet. Glenn was studying his desk with sudden intense focus. Claire looked at Marcus for a long moment. "Because I need to know if yesterday was real," she said finally. "And the only way to know that is to watch you work on something where I control the problems." It was an honest answer. The most honest thing she'd said in any of their conversations. Marcus respected it. "The other contestants," he said. "Harvard, MIT, Yale, yes, the problems will be designed at a professional research level." "Yes, and if I fail," something moved in Claire's expression, "then you'll have tried something that most people would never attempt. And that will be that." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "And if I don't fail," he said. Claire opened her folder and slid a registration form across the desk. "Then we'll figure out what that means when we get there," she said. Marcus looked at the form for a long moment. Then he picked up Glenn's pen from the desk and signed his name. Outside in the hallway, his maintenance cart was waiting. His mop, his cleaning supplies, his notebooks still hidden in his locker 3 hallways away. He had signed a form to enter a mathematics competition. He had also just signed a form that guaranteed that, one way or another, his quiet 11 years of invisibility were ending. Whether that was a good thing or a catastrophic thing, he genuinely did not know yet. He picked up his cart and went back to work. In his maintenance locker, his notebooks sat in the dark behind the cleaning supplies. In them, 17 years of deferred mathematics waited quietly, the way water waits behind a dam. Something had just opened a crack in the wall. And Marcus Reed, walking back through his familiar hallways with his familiar cart, doing his familiar job, could already feel the pressure building. The video did not sleep. By 6 in the morning, the day after the demonstration, it had crossed 5 million views. By 8, news outlets were calling the mathematics department's main line. By 9, the department secretary Patricia had stopped answering the phone entirely. and was sitting at her desk with a look on her face that suggested she was reconsidering several of her life choices. Marcus found out about the $5 million at 6:47 when he arrived for his shift and found 3 students he had never spoken to standing outside the maintenance entrance with their phones out. Not filming him, just watching him. The way people watch something they are trying to reconcile with a story they've already told themselves. He nodded at them and went inside. Patricia caught him in the hallway before he reached his locker. She was holding a coffee cup with both hands and had the look of someone delivering news they weren't sure how to categorize. $5 million, she said. I know, Marcus said. CNN called. He stopped walking, CNN, and somebody from the Boston Globe. And a podcast. I don't know which one. I didn't write it down because I was too busy being overwhelmed. She paused. Marcus, this is not a small thing anymore. It was never a small thing, he said. It just used to be a small thing to the people who decide what's small. Patricia looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her hand briefly on his arm, the way people do when they want to say something and don't have the right words. Be careful today, she said. He went to his locker, changed into his work uniform, and stood for a moment in front of the row of notebooks tucked behind the cleaning supplies. He didn't take any of them out. He just looked at them. Then he picked up his cart and started his shift. The mathematics department felt different that morning. Not loudly different. Not the kind of different that announces itself. The quiet different, where people's eyes move toward you a half second sooner than they used to. And conversations pause when you pass, and the air has a charge to it that wasn't there the day before. 3 graduate students he passed in the hallway looked at him with open curiosity. One of them, a young South Asian woman named Priya, who he recognized from Claire's research seminar, nodded at him with something in her expression that landed differently than the usual polite acknowledgement people gave the maintenance staff. It felt like recognition. He didn't know what to do with that. He kept walking. He was cleaning the corridor outside the faculty offices when he heard Claire's voice through her office door. She was on the phone, and she was not happy. I understand the public interest angle, she was saying, her voice tight and controlled. But this is an academic institution, not a television program. The fact that a video went viral does not change the standards by which we evaluate mathematical ability. A pause. No, the competition criteria exist for a reason. We cannot simply know. I am not saying that. What I am saying is that. Another pause, longer. Fine, I'll consider it. But I am not making any decisions under media pressure. That is not how this department operates. The call ended. Marcus moved his cart quietly past her door and kept going. What he didn't see, because he had already rounded the corner, was Claire sitting at her desk for a long moment after the call ended. Sitting very still. Looking at the registration form on her desk, the one Marcus had signed 2 days ago, and then opening her laptop and pulling up the video. And watching it, not for the first time. She had watched it 4 times already. She kept coming back to the moment when Mark stepped back from the board and turned around. The moment before the room reacted. That 1 second when it was just him and the equation and the silence. She had a very specific feeling about that moment, and she had spent 2 days refusing to name it. She closed the laptop. By mid-morning, word had traveled through the department in the way that word always travels through small academic communities, not through official channels, but through the particular kind of charged gossip that moves faster than email and arrives with more detail. The detail that was traveling this particular morning was this: Marcus Reed had officially been entered into the National Mathematics Challenge. The petition had been approved the previous evening by the department committee. He would compete alongside the graduate students and academic researchers who had been preparing for months. Marcus heard this version of the news from Glenn, his supervisor, who pulled him aside near the supply closet at 10:15 with an expression that suggested he had no idea how to feel about it. "So it's official," Glenn said. "You're in the competition." I signed the form 2 days ago, Marcus said. I know you signed the form. I was there when you signed it. Glenn rubbed the back of his neck. I just want to make sure you know what you're getting into. Those kids, the ones from Harvard and MIT, and wherever they've been doing nothing but studying this stuff for years. That's their whole job. I know, Marcus said. And you've been— Glenn gestured at the cart. I know what I've been doing, Marcus said, not unkindly. Glenn looked at him for a moment. Are you good? He asked. And he said it. The way someone asks when they mean something larger than the surface question. Marcus thought about it honestly. I don't know yet, he said. Ask me after. Glenn nodded slowly, he said. For what it's worth, I watched the video all the way through. He paused. I've worked here for 19 years. Never knew you could do that. You never asked, Marcus said. Glenn absorbed that. No, he said. I guess I didn't. He walked away. Marcus stood for a moment in the hallway. Then he went back to work. The formal announcement of Marcus's inclusion in the competition went out from the university's communications office at noon. Within an hour, the story had been picked up by 14 separate news outlets. By 2 in the afternoon, it had a hashtag. By 3, the hashtag had a counter hashtag, because the internet had decided this was a debate that needed 2 sides. The first side said, this is a beautiful story about overlooked genius and the failures of elitist academic systems. The second side said, this is irresponsible. A janitor competing against professional researchers is a stunt, and whoever approved this entry should be questioned. Both sides were very loud. Neither side had spoken to Marcus. The one person who genuinely surprised Marcus that afternoon was Ethan. Ethan found him in the east hallway at 3:30. He came alone, without his usual posture of academic authority, and he stood in front of Zis's cart with his hands in his jacket pockets and said nothing for a moment. Marcus waited. I owe you an apology, Ethan said finally. The words came out, like they had taken some effort to produce. At the demonstration. What I said about your approach, not generalizing. I was being dismissive. On purpose, Marcus looked at him. I know. You embarrassed me, Ethan said, not on purpose. But you did, and I didn't handle it well. No, Marcus agreed. You didn't. Ethan absorbed that without flinching, which raised him a few degrees in Marcus's estimation. I looked at the approach you used, Ethan said. Last night. Spent about 2 hours with it. He paused. It does generalize. To a significant subset of the non-convex cases I'm working on. I'd been using a method that was computationally heavier by a factor of it. Doesn't matter. The point is you were right, and I was wrong, and I said so in the wrong direction. Marcus studied him. What do you want from me, Ethan? Nothing, Ethan said. I wanted to say it. My advisor always told me the hardest thing in mathematics isn't solving the problem. It's admitting when your approach is wrong. He paused. I think that applies outside of mathematics, too. He put his hand out. Marcus shook it. Good luck in the competition, Ethan said. I mean that. Thank you, Marcus said. Ethan left. Marcus stood in the hallway for a moment, feeling the particular strangeness of a day that kept producing things he hadn't expected. Then he picked up his mop and kept going. The competition was in 11 days. That night, Marcus stayed late, not to clean. He finished his shift at 9, changed out of his uniform, and went to the lecture hall with his notebooks. He spread them open on the front desk and stood at the board for a long time, not writing, just looking at the empty space. He had 11 days. The other contestants had been preparing for months, some of them for years. They had advisors and study groups and access to research libraries and the kind of institutional support that existed to make serious mathematicians feel less alone with hard problems. Marcus had 3 notebooks, a piece of chalk, and the particular focus that comes from 17 years of working on something with no audience and no reward except the work itself. He began writing. He worked through the areas he knew the competition would test: advanced optimization, topology, number theory, the intersections between them. He did not work through them the way you cram for a test. He worked through them the way you have a conversation with someone you haven't seen in a while. Checking in, updating, finding the places where his understanding had gaps and sitting with those gaps long enough to understand their shape. At 11:45, he heard footsteps in the hallway, then a knock on the open door. Claire Whitmore stood in the doorway in a coat and scarf, clearly not expecting the light in the lecture hall to be on, clearly not expecting to find anyone inside. They looked at each other. "I forgot something in the building," she said. "Okay," he said. She looked at the board, at his notebooks, at the chalk in his hand. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked. "Working in here at night." "A while," he said. She walked slowly to the board and stood beside him, reading what he had written. He let her. After a moment, she reached out and pointed at a particular line. "There's a more direct path through this section," she said. "You're taking the long route." "I know," he said. "The long route teaches me something the short route skips." She looked at him. "What does it teach you?" "Why the short route works," he said. "If you only ever take the shortcut, you never understand the terrain." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a different tone, quieter, less defended, "My doctoral advisor said something like that once. I thought it was old-fashioned at the time. What do you think now?" She didn't answer immediately. "I think some things that seem old-fashioned are just true things that got inconvenient." She looked at the notebooks on the desk, not reaching for them, just looking. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Why did you stay at this university?" 11 years cleaning floors in a building full of mathematics." She paused. "Why not go somewhere else? Somewhere with no connection to what you'd left behind. Wouldn't that have been easier?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Because I needed to stay close to it," he said finally. "Even if I couldn't be part of it. Even if all I could do was clean the rooms where it happened." He paused. "Some people stay near the ocean even when they can't swim anymore. Because the sound of it is still something." Claire looked at him for a long time. Long enough that he became aware of it as a specific length of time. "I watched the video," she said, "multiple times." "So did about 6 million other people," he said. "It's different when you're the one who wrote the equation on the board," she said. "When you're watching someone solve your own research problem in front of you." She paused. "I want you to know what I said, the joke I made." "You don't have to." "I want to say it anyway," she said. "It wasn't a joke. Not entirely. It was a test. A dressed-up, mean-spirited test designed to make you fail publicly so I could prove a point to myself." She met his eyes. "That was wrong, and I knew it was wrong when I was doing it. And I did it anyway." Marcus looked at her for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you're going to be in a room with me for a competition that I designed," she said. "And you should know what kind of person I was when I designed it." He thought about that. "What kind of person are you now?" She looked slightly surprised by the question. "I'm not sure yet," she said honestly. "I think I'm still finding out." She picked up her bag. "Go home and sleep, Marcus. 11 days of working yourself to exhaustion won't help you as much as 8 hours of rest and a clear head." She walked to the door. "Professor Whitmore," he said. She stopped. "The equation you wrote on the board during the demonstration," he said. "The one from your research?" "Yes?" "You told the room it was from your doctoral research." "It was." "No," he said. "The structure of the problem is postdoctoral. The approach assumes a theoretical framework that wasn't established until about 9 years ago. Which means you've been working on this problem for at least 8 years. Which means it's not solved yet." The silence was very complete. "Why does that matter to you?" she asked carefully. "Because I've been working on a related problem for 6 years," he said. "In those notebooks. And I think I'm close." Claire stood in the doorway. The look on her face was something Marcus had never seen there before. All the professional armor, the careful control, the practiced composure, it was still there. But underneath it, something had shifted. Something that looked, from the right angle, like the beginning of genuine attention. "Close how?" she said. "I won't know until I finish it," he said. But close. She left. Marcus stood at the board for another minute. Then he picked up his chalk and kept working. Over the next 10 days, the university became a different place. The quiet academic hallways, which had operated for decades on the assumption that important things happened in offices and classrooms and faculty meetings, began to feel the pressure of a world that had decided to look through the windows. Media requests arrived daily. The communications office developed a policy. The policy was no comment regarding individual students or participants, which satisfied nobody and generated at least 2 opinion pieces in academic journals about institutional transparency. A documentary crew requested access to film the competition. Claire refused. They set up outside the building instead. Online, the discourse had developed layers. The original video had spawned analysis videos, reaction videos, videos of mathematicians at other universities watching the original video and commenting on the mathematics. A retired professor from the University of Chicago posted a 12-minute breakdown of Marcus's solution that ended with the sentence, "I have taught mathematics for 31 years, and I want to be clear what this man did is not a trick, and it is not luck. It is mastery." That video got 4 million views in 48 hours. The counter-narrative persisted. Several academic voices argued that the competition was being turned into entertainment, that the presence of an unaffiliated candidate with no current institutional standing undermined the integrity of the event, that the media attention was a distraction from serious academic work. What none of the voices on either side knew, what almost nobody knew, was that Marcus had spent the 10 days not following any of this. He had asked Patricia to stop showing him the coverage after the 3rd day. Not because it frightened him, because it wasn't useful. He needed to think. He couldn't think clearly when he was aware of the size of the audience. He worked his shifts. He cleaned his hallways. He ate his lunch in the break room. And every night, from 9 until midnight, or sometimes 1 in the morning, he worked in his lecture hall with his notebooks and his chalk and the particular silence of a building after everyone else has gone home. On the 6th night, Claire came back. She knocked on the open door again. This time she had 2 coffees. She set one on the front desk without saying anything and sat in the 2nd row with her own cup and a folder she had brought with her. Marcus looked at the coffee, then at her. "I'm not here to help you prepare," she said. "That would be a conflict of interest. I'm here to work on my own research. This room has the best board in the building. You have an office," he said. "My office has a window that looks directly at the sidewalk where the documentary crew has been setting up every morning," she said. "This room doesn't." Marcus picked up the coffee. "Fair enough," he said. They worked in silence for an hour. Separate problems, separate sides of the room, the occasional sound of chalk and the occasional soft sound of pages turning. It was, Marcus thought, one of the stranger hours he had spent in a long time. And also, one of the more comfortable. At some point, Claire said, without looking up from her folder, "Your approach to the boundary problem in the 3rd notebook." Marcus went very still. "You looked at my notebooks. You left them on the desk. That wasn't an invitation." "I know," she said. "I looked anyway. I apologize." She didn't sound entirely apologetic. She sounded like someone who had found something they couldn't help looking at. The approach in the 3rd notebook. The extended proof starting on page 47. Marcus turned slowly. "What about it?" "It's wrong," she said. "I know," he said. She looked up. "You know, I've known for about 2 years. I haven't been able to find the correction." She stared at him. "You've had an unresolved error in a proof sitting in your notebook for 2 years, and you've just been living with it," he said. "Yes, because the error is interesting. The error tells me something about the structure of the problem that a correct proof wouldn't tell me." Claire looked at him for a long moment. "My advisor's advisor," she said slowly. "A mathematician named Dr. Harold Voss. He used to say that the most valuable thing in mathematics is a beautiful mistake, because a beautiful mistake means you're asking the right question in the wrong way, and all you have to do is find the right way. She paused. I haven't thought about that in years. What happened to Dr. Voss? Marcus asked. He retired, she said. He lives in Vermont. He's 81. She paused again. He would like you, I think. The sentence landed quietly in the room. Marcus turned back to his work. Get some sleep, Professor Whitmore. You too, Marcus. She left. He stood at the board for a moment. Then he opened his third notebook to page 47 and looked at the beautiful mistake. And, for the first time in 2 years, he thought he could see the shape of the correction. On the 9th day, something happened that Marcus had not anticipated. He was in the faculty lounge refilling the coffee station when 3 of the competition contestants walked in. Not Ethan. 3 others, a Harvard research student named Daniel, a Yale doctoral candidate named Sophie, and a young man named Kwame from a university in Atlanta whose name Marcus hadn't heard before but who had, he'd been told, the highest qualifying score of any entrant. They saw Marcus. There was a moment of rearrangement that recalibration people do when they encounter someone out of their expected context. Then Kwame said, "You're Marcus Reed." "Yes," Marcus said. Kwame nodded, not with the polite condescension Marcus was used to, with the specific nod of someone who has done their homework and is acknowledging what they found. "I watched the video about 15 times, Kwame said. "The move you made, at the end, the dimensional reduction. I hadn't seen that approach applied to that class of problem before. I spent 3 days trying to generalize it." "Could you?" Marcus asked. Kwame smiled, partially. "You want to hear where I got stuck?" And that was how Marcus Reed ended up sitting in the faculty lounge for 45 minutes with 3 graduate students from elite universities talking about mathematics the way people talk about something they love. Not performing, not competing, just thinking out loud together, the way mathematicians have always done when they forget to be careful about who they're talking to. Sophie, the Yale candidate, had a question about the optimization approach Marcus had used in the demonstration. Daniel, the Harvard student, challenged one of Marcus's assumptions about boundary conditions, a different boundary problem than the one in the lecture hall, a new one, harder, and Marcus challenged it back. And they went 3 rounds before Daniel conceded the point with a grin that suggested he had enjoyed losing. When Marcus stood to leave, Daniel said, "I'll be honest with you. When I heard you were in the competition, I thought it was a publicity thing. I thought you'd be out after round 1, and now?" Marcus said. "Now I think round 1 is going to be very interesting," Daniel said. Kwame was watching Marcus with an expression of genuine evaluation. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Yes. Why are you still working as a janitor? If you can do what I've seen in that video, why haven't you gone back to academic mathematics?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Because the door to that room is controlled by people who decide who belongs in it," he said. "And for 17 years, the people who controlled that door looked at my resume, saw the gap, saw the current job title, and closed it before I could say anything." The 3 of them were very quiet. "That's not right," Sophie said. Not arguing, just stating. "No," Marcus said, "it's not." He picked up his coffee and left. The next morning was the day before the competition. Marcus arrived at his shift and found an envelope in his locker. No name on the outside. Inside was a single index card with 7 lines of mathematics written in very precise handwriting. It was the correction to the error on page 47 of his 3rd notebook. He stood in front of his locker and read it twice. He knew whose handwriting it was. He didn't say anything about it to anyone. He put the card in his shirt pocket and went to work. That evening, he checked the correction against his work. It was right. Of course it was right. And it opened the proof in a direction that changed the shape of everything around it, like removing one wrong stone from a wall. and watching the whole structure rearrange itself into something more solid. He sat at the board for a long time. Then he wrote her a note on a piece of paper and put it under her office door. It said, "I see it now, thank you." That night he slept for 8 hours. He had not slept that well in 17 years. The morning of the competition, Marcus arrived at the university at 7. He was still in his maintenance uniform. He hadn't changed to anything else because he didn't own anything he felt more like himself in. The lecture hall where the competition would be held was larger than the one where he had first corrected Claire's proof. There were seats for 300 observers, faculty, students, members of the public who had registered online. Every seat was filled. Outside, the documentary crew had been joined by 3 news cameras. Inside, backstage in the small prep room behind the stage, Marcus sat alone with his notebook on his knee and looked at nothing in particular. The door opened and Claire came in. She was in full professor mode, composed, professional, carrying the particular authority she wore like a second coat. She looked at him and for a moment said nothing. "You ready?" she said. "Ask me that in 3 hours," he said. She almost smiled. "Fair answer." She started to leave, then stopped. "The note you left," she said, "under my door." "Yes." "You shouldn't thank me," she said. "A competition judge providing any guidance to a contestant." "You didn't provide guidance," he said. "You corrected an error in a private notebook that you read without permission. Those are very different things." She looked at him. "Besides," he said, "I would have found it eventually." "I know," she said. "That's why I showed you." She left. Marcus sat alone in the prep room and listened to the sound of 300 people settling into their seats on the other side of the wall. The murmur of a crowd that had come expecting to see something, though most of them probably weren't sure exactly what. He thought about his mother. He thought about the drive home from MIT 17 years ago. The bag packed in the back seat. The feeling of leaving something he wasn't sure he'd be able to find again. He thought about 11 years of hallways and notebooks and chalk marks wiped clean for this, so nobody would know. He thought about the index card in his shirt pocket. Then he thought about mathematics. The specific problem he'd been told the final round would address he hadn't been told the problem itself, just the domain. He let his mind move through the territory, checking the paths, feeling the terrain. Somewhere in the building, a clock he couldn't see marked 8:45, 15 minutes to the start. Marcus Reed opened his notebook to a fresh page, pressed it flat, and wrote a single line at the top. Not a formula, not a theorem, just a sentence, in plain English, that his old MIT advisor had written on the first page of the first proof Marcus ever handed him. "Begin with what you know to be true. Everything else will follow." He capped his pen. He was ready. The auditorium was the loudest quiet Marcus had ever heard. 300 people settled into their seats, and the combined effect of their breathing and their shifting and their low murmured conversations created a sound that was not silence, but felt more pressurized than silence. The kind of atmospheric weight that builds in rooms where something is about to be decided. Marcus walked onto the stage at 8:59, and the room did something he had not expected. It applauded, not politely, not the careful, measured applause of an academic audience acknowledging a scheduled participant. Real applause. The kind that starts in one corner and pulls the rest of the room with it before anyone has consciously decided to join. He stopped walking for a moment. He had not prepared himself for that. He found his position at the leftmost of the 5 contestant stations, long tables arranged in a slight arc facing the main board and the judge's table, and he set down his notebook and stood behind and waited for the sound to settle. The other 4 contestants were already there. Daniel from Harvard, composed and professionally still. Sophie from Yale, who gave Marcus a small nod when their eyes met. Quam, who looked like the only person in the room who was actually relaxed about any of this. A fifth contestant Marcus hadn't met, a young woman named Iris from a research program at Caltech, who was looking at her notes with the focused downward attention of someone who has decided the best strategy is to pretend the audience doesn't exist. At the judges' table, 5 people sat behind nameplates. Marcus recognized 2 of them, a senior professor from the MIT mathematics faculty named Dr. Osi, and a researcher from the National Science Foundation named Dr. Yamamoto, whose work on applied topology Marcus had read in his notebooks more times than he could count. Claire sat at the center of the judges' table. She was looking at the papers in front of her. She did not look up when Marcus came in. He understood why. In this room, in this context, they were not 2 people who had stood together in an empty lecture hall at midnight, talking about beautiful mistakes and the sound of the ocean. They were judge and contestant. The distance between them was procedural and necessary. He understood it, he respected it. It still felt strange. The competition director, a thin man named Professor Aldridge, who ran these events with the clipped efficiency of someone who had been doing them for 20 years, and found them slightly exhausting, stepped to the microphone at 9 o'clock exactly, and the room went genuinely quiet. "Welcome to the 34th Annual National Mathematics Challenge," Aldridge said. "The rules are as follows: 3 rounds. Each round eliminates contestants until 1 remains. All work must be shown. All solutions must be explained verbally to the judges. Contestants may use chalk, pencil, or pen, no electronic devices. No reference materials." He paused. "Round 1 begins now." The first problem appeared on the large screen above the main board. Marcus read it once, then again. It was a proof problem establishing a specific property of a class of functions under a set of constraints. Graduate level but not research level. The kind of problem designed to establish baseline competence, to separate the people who had genuinely mastered the material from the people who had memorized enough to appear like they had. He picked up his pencil. Around him, he heard the other contestants begin. The soft sound of pencils on paper. The particular rhythm of people working under pressure, which was different from the rhythm of people working at leisure. Faster, more anxious, more prone to the small sounds of crossing things out. Marcus did not start by writing. He sat for 90 seconds with his pencil held lightly in his right hand and his eyes on the problem statement on the screen. He was listening to the problem. That was the only way he had ever been able to describe it to himself. The period of not writing was a period of listening, of letting the structure of the problem arrange itself in his head before he committed anything to paper. His MIT advisor had called it finding the shape of it. Most people, under competition conditions, were too anxious for that first listening period. They started writing immediately because writing felt like progress. Marcus had learned over 17 years of working alone with no time pressure and no audience that the listening period was not wasted time. It was the most important time. At the 90-second mark, he began to write. His approach was the same one that had made people pause in the demonstration. He did not attack the problem from the top down. He built from the foundational assumptions, establishing each step with a clarity that was not simplistic, but was genuinely clear, the kind of clarity that comes from understanding something deeply enough to explain it to someone who isn't a specialist. 12 minutes later, he set down his pencil. He was the first contestant to finish. The room noticed. There was a movement in the audience, a collective adjustment, as people registered what had happened. Sophie looked up from her work briefly, then back down. Kwame glanced sideways with an expression that was not quite a smile. Daniel had not looked up at all. Aldridge collected Marcus's paper first. The judges reviewed it in sequence. The review took 6 minutes longer than Marcus expected, and during those 6 minutes he sat at his station and looked at nothing in particular and tried not to calculate what the length of the review meant. It meant they were checking it very carefully. Dr. Osi from MIT set the paper down and said something quietly to Claire. Claire looked at the paper, Then she looked at Marcus. Her expression gave him nothing. Aldridge stepped back to the microphone. The judges have reviewed round 1 submissions. All 5 contestants have produced valid solutions. We will proceed to round 2. The audience released a collective breath. Marcus picked up his pencil again. Round 2 arrived 15 minutes later and was a different kind of problem. Not a proof. An applied problem, a specific mathematical modeling question drawn from real research contexts, the kind where there were multiple valid approaches, and the judges were evaluating not just correctness, but the quality of the mathematical thinking, the sophistication of the approach, the elegance of the solution path. This was the round Marcus had spent the most time thinking about in the 10 days leading up to the competition. Not because he was uncertain about the mathematics, but because he knew this was where his approach would diverge most visibly from the other contestants. And he hadn't fully decided whether to work within conventional methods or to do what felt natural to him, which was often unconventional enough to make people look twice. He made the decision in the first 2 minutes. Natural. He would work naturally. There was no point in 17 years of developing an independent mathematical voice if you swallowed it the moment anyone was watching. He began. What Marcus did with the round 2 problem was something that several people in the audience, including 3 faculty members who would later write about it, described afterward as almost pedagogical. He did not simply solve the problem. He revealed the problem. He built his solution in layers that exposed the underlying structure of the mathematical questions itself, so that watching him work was not just watching someone produce an answer, but understanding in real time why the answer was what it was. It was the kind of work that made the mathematics feel less like a locked room and more like a room with the lights turned on. He finished in 23 minutes. This time, Kwame finished 2 minutes later. Then Iris. Then Sophie and Daniel within a minute of each other. The judging of round 2 took longer. 14 minutes. During those 14 minutes, the audience was audibly less patient than they'd been after round 1. People were shifting. There were whispered conversations. Someone near the back was clearly on their phone, despite the request not to be. Marcus sat still. At the judges' table, the conversation was more visible than it had been after round 1. Dr. Yamamoto was speaking with some intensity. Doctor. Osi was nodding. One of the other judges, a professor from Johns Hopkins named Dr. Reeves, had picked up Marcus's paper and was holding it the way people hold documents when they are reading something that is making them rethink something else. Claire was looking at the paper in front of her. She had a pen in her hand and she was not writing with it. She was holding it very still. Aldridge came back to the microphone. His delivery, which had been professionally neutral all morning, carried a slightly different quality now. The quality of a person who is announcing something they find genuinely interesting. After round 2, he said, 3 contestants will proceed to the final round. The following names are called forward: Kwame Asante, Iris Chen. A pause. The audience leaned. Marcus Reed. The room ignited. Not just applause this time. Something more like the sound of 300 people releasing a tension they hadn't consciously known they were holding. Daniel shook his head slowly, not with bitterness, but with something that looked like honest concession. Sophie pressed her lips together and then stood and began gathering her notes. And as she passed Marcus's station, she paused and said, quietly and without performance, "I want you to win." "I mean that genuinely." Marcus said, "Thank you, Sophie." She nodded and kept walking. The break before the final round was 20 minutes. Marcus did not leave the stage. He sat at his station and opened his notebook to the fresh page, with his advisor's sentence at the top, and looked at it. "Begin with what you know to be true." Kwame came and sat on the edge of the table next to him, not at his own station, just nearby, the way someone sits near another person when they want company without conversation. For a minute, Kwame said, "Did you know what the final round problem would be?" "The domain," Marcus said, "not the specific problem." Me too. Kwame paused. I've been told it's from current research. Not textbook problems, something nobody has solved yet. Marcus looked at him. Where did you hear that? From someone who heard it from a graduate student who does administrative work for the department, Kwame said. So, take it with a grain of salt, or maybe the whole shaker. Marcus thought about what Claire had said 9 days ago in the empty lecture hall. The equation on the board during the demonstration. The 8 years of unresolved research. He thought about the correction on the index card in his shirt pocket. Kwame, he said, why do you do mathematics? Kwame looked at him with mild surprise at the question. Then, he thought about it honestly, which was something Marcus noticed and appreciated. Because it's the only place where the rules are completely fair, Kwame said. In every other room, it matters who you are, where you come from, who your parents are. In mathematics, the proof is either right or it isn't. The problem doesn't care about any of that. He paused. I grew up in a neighborhood in Atlanta where people assumed certain things about you because of certain things. Mathematics was the first room I ever walked into where none of those assumptions applied. He looked at Marcus. I imagine you understand that. I understand that, Marcus said. But why do you do it? Kwame asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Because it's the only thing I ever found that felt as large as the inside of my head, he said. Everything else felt small. Mathematics felt the same size. Kwame looked at him for a moment. Then he put out his hand. Good luck, he said. You too, Marcus said. They shook hands the way people shake hands when they mean it. The 20-minute break ended. The final round problem appeared on the screen at 10:47. Marcus read it. The room was completely silent. He read it again. The problem was from a specific area of advanced mathematics involving the behavior of certain types of mathematical structures under transformation, the kind of problem that sat at the intersection of several different mathematical disciplines and required fluency in all of them simultaneously. It was not a textbook problem. It was not something with a known solution path. It was genuinely open, the kind of problem that research mathematicians spent months with, that generated journal articles, not when they were solved, but when someone made partial progress on them. Marcus realized with a slow, settling certainty. Directly adjacent to the problem he had been working on in his notebooks for 6 years as. Not the same problem, but the same territory. The same underlying mathematical country approached from a different angle. He had spent 6 years walking through that country, in the dark. He knew the terrain. He knew where the ground was solid and where it dropped away. He knew which paths looked promising and led nowhere, and which paths looked difficult and led somewhere important. He sat with the problem for 3 full minutes without writing. Around him, Kwame had already started. Iris was writing rapidly. The scratch of chalk and pencil was the only sound in the room. At the 3-minute mark, Marcus began. His hand was completely steady. The first 15 minutes of the final round were agonizing to watch from the outside. All 3 contestants were working hard, and the visible intensity of 3 people, thinking at maximum capacity, created a kind of charged stillness in the room that the audience responded to by becoming very, very quiet. Then, at the 16-minute mark, Iris stopped, not finished. She put down her pencil and pressed both hands flat on the desk and looked at her work with an expression of exhausted frustration. She picked up her pencil again, crossed out 3 lines, tried a different approach, stopped again. She was hitting a wall. Anyone who had ever worked on a genuinely hard problem recognized what was happening. The place where your current approach runs out of road, and you have to either find a new road or accept that you've gone as far as you can go. Marcus was aware of it peripherally. He did not let it affect his rhythm. At 22 minutes, he hit his own wall, not a gradual slowdown. A specific, identifiable moment where the approach he was using reached a transition point that required a step he could see the shape of but couldn't quite execute. He had encountered this shape before in his notebooks, in the dark of the lecture hall, at midnight, in the margin of his third notebook, where a beautiful mistake had lived for 2 years until an index card slid under a door had shown him something new. He stopped writing. He looked at what he had produced. 22 minutes of work. Clean, careful, building logically from foundation to midpoint. But the midpoint was where the problem got genuinely hard, where the standard approaches fractured as against the complexity, where research mathematicians had stalled for years. He heard Claire's voice in his head, though she had not spoken. Sentence from 9 days ago in the empty lecture hall. Never confuse complexity with difficulty. He thought about what his MIT advisor had written in the margin of his first proof, about what was assumed and what was proved, about the difference between chasing the answer and understanding the question. He looked at the problem again, and then he did something that several people in the room would describe later as the most startling mathematical moment they had witnessed in person. He erased 20 minutes of work. Not all of it. He kept the foundational steps, the first 6 lines that established the basic framework. But everything above the 6th line, the entire middle section of his solution, he erased cleanly and stood for a moment with a blank board above a 6-line foundation. The audience made a sound, a collective intake of breath. Kwame looked sideways. Iris looked up. At the judges' table, one of the judges leaned forward. Claire's pen went very still. Marcus began again. He did not take the conventional path into the middle of the problem. He came at it from underneath, from a direction that wasn't the most obvious approach, but that the 6 years of working in adjacent mathematical territory had shown him was where the problem had a natural weak point. Not a shortcut, not a trick. A genuine structural insight about where the problem was willing to yield if you pushed from the right direction. The new approach moved faster than the old one. At the 30-minute mark, he was past the point where he had erased. At the 35-minute mark, territory he had never written down before new work, real time, on a problem nobody had solved in front of 300 people. His hand had stopped being steady, not from nerves, from the particular physical intensity of working at the edge of your own understanding, where the thing you're writing is slightly ahead of the thing you know, and you're writing fast enough to keep up with it. At 38 minutes, Kwame set down his chalk. Not finished, not giving up. He stood and looked at Marcus's board. He stood there for 30 seconds, reading. Then he turned to face the judges and said, quietly but clearly enough that the front rows could hear, "I can't solve it." But he can. And I think he's about to. The room responded to that with a silence that was almost reverent. At 41 minutes, Marcus wrote the final line. He stepped back. His arm was shaking slightly. He became aware of it and pressed it to his side. He looked at what he had written. The complete solution filled the board from the upper left corner to the lower right. Not in a straight line, it moved the way real mathematical work moves, with branches and corrections and small marginal notes, the organic shape of actual thinking rather than the clean linearity of something worked out in advance and then transcribed. He looked at it for a long moment, then he set down the chalk and turned to face the room. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds, then it broke. The sound was not like the applause when he walked in. That had been warm and supportive. This was different. This was 300 people responding to something they had just witnessed without fully being able to articulate what it was, the particular sound of an audience that has been present for something they will describe to other people for years. At the judge's table, nobody was moving. Dr. Yamamoto was on his feet, which Marcus had not seen him do once during the entire morning. He was leaning slightly forward with both hands on the table and his glasses pushed up on his forehead, looking at the board like a man who has spotted something in the distance and is not yet what he's seeing but is not bunt, is certain it's significant. Dr. Osi had one hand over his mouth. Dr. Reeves from Johns Hopkins had picked up his pen and put it down twice without writing anything. Claire was completely still. She was reading the solution. From the beginning, every line. Her eyes moved slowly and carefully across the board, and her pen was in her hand again, but she was still not using it, holding it the way you hold something for comfort rather than function. Marcus waited. The formal review process took 18 minutes. 18 minutes where the audience slowly stopped being an audience and started being a collection of individuals talking quietly, checking their phones, in several cases wiping their eyes without appearing to notice they were doing it. Marcus sat at his station. He had closed his notebook. There was nothing more to write. Kwame sat at his own station, with his arms crossed and his chin slightly up, watching the judges with a focused expression of someone who had accepted an outcome and was now simply witnessing it. Iris had her face in her hands, not from distress, from a kind of overwhelmed awe that Marcus recognized because he had seen it before, in the faces of people encountering something unexpectedly large. At 11:43, Dr. Yamamoto sat back down. He said something to Claire. Marcus could not hear it. He watched Claire's face as she received whatever Dr. Yamamoto said. Her expression did not crack. She was too controlled for that. But something shifted underneath it, the way light shifts through water when something moves below the surface. She nodded once, then she looked at Marcus, just for a moment, less than a second. Then she looked at her papers and said something to Aldridge. Aldridge came to the microphone. He was not quite managing his usual professional neutrality. His face had the quality of a man who has been running events for 20 years and has just experienced something he had not expected to experience in year 20. He cleared his throat. "The judges have completed their review of the final round," he said. "I have been asked to read a statement from the panel before the result is announced." The room went very quiet. Aldridge looked at the paper in his hand. "The judges wish to note," he said, "that the solution presented by the third finalist in the final round is not merely a valid solution to the problem as posed. It represents a novel approach that the panel constitutes a genuine contribution to the current state of research in this area." He paused. The panel further notes that this approach opens several directions for future investigation that were not previously identified in the existing literature. He lowered the paper. The winner of the 34th National Mathematics Challenge is Marcus Reed. What happened in the room after that was not something Marcus could later reconstruct in sequence. He was aware of the sound. He was aware of people on their feet. He was aware of Kwame's hand on his shoulder and the specific warmth of that. He was aware of Iris saying something he didn't hear over the noise. He was aware that at some point that the sound had changed, moved from pure reaction to something more sustained, more like what a standing ovation actually is, when it means something rather than being performed. And in the center of all of it, Marcus Reed stood very still. He was thinking about his mother. Not a complicated thought. Just her face, clear and specific, the way she looked in the kitchens on Sunday mornings when he was 12 years old, and she would quiz him on multiplication tables while making breakfast and laugh when he got them all right. The way she said, every single time, with exactly the same warmth, "That's my boy. That brain is going to take you somewhere." He had carried that somewhere with him for 42 years. Through MIT and Baltimore and the long drive home and the 2 lost years and the maintenance cart and 11 years of hallways. He was here now. He wondered if somewhere was big enough. He thought it probably was. At some point the sound settled, and Aldridge was guiding him toward the judges' table to receive the award documentation and the formal announcement of the research grant, and Marcus moved through the crowd of people trying to reach him with the slight unreality of someone in a dream, who can feel the weight of their own feet, but is not entirely sure the floor is solid. He reached the judges' table. Dr. Osi shook his hand with both of his own and said, "I taught at MIT for 26 years. I remember your name from your time there. I am profoundly sorry it took this long for the right room to have you in it. Marcus held the older man's handshake for a moment. Thank you, he said. Dr. Yamamoto said, the approach you used in the final section, the transformation from below. I want to talk to you about extending it. When you have time, I'll make time, Marcus said. Dr. Reeves said nothing. He just shook Marcus's hand and held it a beat longer than necessary, with an expression that said everything the words weren't quite equal to. Then Marcus was in front of Claire. She was standing. The professional distance she had maintained all morning was still technically in place. She was the head judge. This was the award ceremony. There were 300 people watching. But her eyes, when she looked at him, were not the eyes of the head judge. She held out the award documentation, a formal envelope. He took it. Congratulations, Mr. Reed, she said. Her voice was completely controlled. Her face was almost completely controlled. Almost. Thank you, Professor Whitmore, he said, a beat. Very brief. The length of a breath. The approach in the final section, she said, quietly enough that only he could hear. The transformation from below. Yes, he said. Is that what you've been working on in the notebooks? The 6-year problem? It's related, he said. The correction you gave me. The index card. It unlocked something. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he still couldn't fully name. It was layered, professional, and personal, and something beneath both of those that was still finding its shape. I didn't give you the solution, she said. No, he said. You gave me the key. I opened the door myself. 300 people were watching them. Neither of them acknowledged it. There's a research position, Claire said. In this department. It's been unfilled for 2 years because the right candidate hasn't appeared. She paused. I think the right candidate may have appeared. Marcus looked at her. Are you offering me a position at this competition? He said. In front of 300 people and a documentary crew? I'm noting that a position exists, she said. The formal conversation would happen through appropriate channels. Of course, he said, but I wanted you to know now, she said, so that you know it exists. So that when you walk out of this building today, you know there is a door that is open. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He thought about a lot of things in that moment. About the year his mother got sick. About the letters he had written and the brief, polite responses he had received. About 11 years of pushing a cart through hallways and staying late with chalk and notebooks. About a woman who had grabbed his arm and thrown chalk on the floor in front of 200 people and called it a joke. About the same woman standing in his lecture hall at midnight with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of honesty that costs something to produce. I'll be at the meeting, he said. She held out her hand. He shook it. The room applauded again, and this time Marcus let himself hear it. Really hear it. Not as noise or pressure or the weight of other people's attention. Just as sound. The simple human sound of people in a room who have seen something that moved them. It turned out somewhere was exactly the right size. It turned out it had been waiting for him the whole time. The envelope was still in Marcus's hand when he walked out of the auditorium. Not the award envelope. That one he had handed to Patricia, who had appeared from somewhere in the crowd with tears streaming down her face and both arms open, and he had let her hug him for a full 10 seconds before she pulled back, looked at his face, and said, Don't you dare tell me you're going back to mopping floors tomorrow. I have a shift, he said. Marcus Reed, she said. I've a shift, Patricia. She had taken the envelope from him then, because she seemed to feel that someone needed to be responsible for it, and Marcus had walked through the crowd of people trying to reach him with the particular focused movement of a man who needs 5 minutes alone and knows exactly where to find them. The envelope he was still holding was smaller, personal. No name on the outside. Someone had pressed it into his hand in the crowd outside the auditorium, and he had not seen who. He had felt it arrive and closed his fingers around it and kept walking. He found the east stairwell, which was empty because it was a competition day, and everyone was either in the auditorium or directly outside it. He sat on the third step from the bottom and opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once. He unfolded it. It was a letter, handwritten in ink on university stationery. The handwriting was not Claire's. He had learned Claire's handwriting from the index card and from the marginalia in a research paper she had left on the front desk of the lecture hall, one of the nights they had worked in the same room. This was different. Older, more formal. The precise, deliberate handwriting of someone who had written many important things by hand over many years. The letter was from Dr. Elena Parker. He did not know who Dr. Elena Parker was. The name was unfamiliar, but the letter told him. She was a visiting professor from MIT. She had been in the audience. Not because of the competition or the viral video or the media coverage, but because she had seen Marcus Reed's name in the participant list and had needed to see for herself whether it was the same Marcus Reed she had known 17 years ago. It was. Dr. Elena Parker had been a junior faculty member at MIT during the 2 years Marcus had spent in the graduate program. She had not been his advisor, but she had been in the room when his advisor presented Marcus's early research at a departmental colloquium. She had been in the room when his advisor said, in front of the entire mathematics faculty, that Marcus Reed was the most naturally gifted student he had taught in 30 years of teaching. She remembered the day Marcus left. She remembered his advisor coming into the faculty lounge afterward with a look on his face that she had never seen before, or since the look of a man who has just watched something irreplaceable walk out of a room. She had looked for Marcus afterward. Not immediately, because life was busy and she was building her own career, but later, when she had the time and the resources to look. She had found nothing. The gap in his record was complete. He had simply disappeared from the academic world. Until 6 days ago, when his name appeared in a participant list for a competition at Whitmore University in Boston, and she had driven 4 hours to be in that auditorium. The last paragraph of the letter was short. It said, "What I watched you do today was not a surprise to me. It was a confirmation of something I have believed for 17 years. The mathematics community lost something when it lost you, and it has not yet understood the full cost of that loss. I would like very much to talk to you about what comes next. My number is below. Please call me." There are people who have been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for you to come back. Marcus sat on the step and read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, next to the index card that was still there from 10 days ago. He sat in the stairwell for a few more minutes, not thinking about anything specific, just sitting with the weight of the day, which was considerable. Then he stood up, straightened his maintenance uniform. He had thought about changing before the competition and decided against it. And he still didn't regret that decision and went back out to find the crowd. The crowd found him first. What followed the competition in the hours immediately after was the kind of controlled chaos that Marcus had no reference point for. People wanted to talk to him, not in the polite, distant way of people acknowledging someone interesting. In the direct, pressing, immediate way of people who feel they have something to say and are not going to get another chance to say it. A documentary filmmaker named James, who had been the person outside with the camera crew, found him in the main hallway and spent 4 minutes explaining, with genuine passion, why Marcus's story needed to be told in long form. Marcus listened. He thanked the man. He did not commit to anything. 2 journalists had somehow gotten inside the building. Claire's communications embargo had apparently had its limits, and they were both trying to reach Marcus simultaneously, which meant they were also competing with each other, which lent the interaction a quality of low-grade performance that Marcus found somewhat exhausting. He answered 3 questions from each of them. He was polite and specific, and did not say anything he didn't mean. Then, Patricia appeared at his elbow like a guardian spirit and said, with the warm authority of someone who has been managing situations for decades, "Marcus has had a very long day and needs some time. You have his name. You know where to find him." She steered him away. "Thank you," he said. 23 years of managing this department," she said. "You learn to move people." She walked with him toward the maintenance wing and then stopped outside the door. "Glenn wanted me to tell you that your position here is yours for as long as you want it," she said. He said to say that officially. He was very specific about the word officially. Marcus looked at her. "What did he mean by that?" "He meant that you have options now," she said. "And he didn't want you to feel like the floor disappears under you while you're figuring out what they are." She paused. He also said, and I'm quoting exactly, "Tell him the floors will survive without him, but it won't be the same." Marcus felt something in his chest that he wasn't going to examine too closely right now. "Tell Glenn I said thank you. Tell him yourself," she said. "He's been in his office for 2 hours watching the live stream replay." She left. Marcus stood at the door to the maintenance wing for a moment. His cart was inside. His locker was inside. 11 years of his life were inside, packed into the specific geography of a janitor's working day, the routes and timing and quiet rhythms that had structured his existence here. He went in. He changed out of his uniform. He opened his locker and took out the notebooks, all 3 of them, and put them in the worn canvas bag he kept on the top shelf. He took the index card from his shirt pocket and put it carefully between the pages of the 3rd notebook, where the beautiful mistake had lived and where the correction now lived beside it. He closed the locker. He stood there for a moment. Then he picked up his cart, because his shift wasn't done, and he had never left a shift unfinished in 11 years, and he was not going to start today. He did his remaining 2 hours. He mopped the east corridor. He emptied the trash in the faculty lounge. He checked the supply levels in 3 of the bathroom stations and filed the restock request with the form on the clipboard outside Glenn's office. At 4:37, he clocked out. At 4:38, standing in the parking lot with his canvas bag over his shoulder, and the late afternoon sun making everything look slightly more significant than it probably was, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. "Boston area code," he answered. "Mr. Reed," said a woman's voice, warm, precise, the voice of someone who chooses their words carefully without making it feel effortful. "My name is Dr. Elena Parker. I believe you received my letter." Marcus stood very still. "I did. I apologize for the method of delivery. I was not certain you would have time to speak with me at the event itself, and I wanted you to have something to read in your own time." A pause. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" "I'm in the parking lot," he said. "That's fine," she said. "Parking lots are underrated as conversation spaces." Another pause. "I'll be brief, because I imagine today has been a great deal. I want to ask you one question, and then I want to listen to your answer for as long as you want to talk." "All right," he said. "What do you want?" she said. "Not what are your options, not what is being offered to you, not what would be reasonable or practical or appropriate. What do you actually want, Marcus? For your mathematics. For yourself." The question landed like something clean and direct in a day full of complexity. He stood in the parking lot and thought about it honestly. "I want to finish the work," he said, "the work in the notebooks. The 6-year problem. I want to finish it properly, with the resources to do it right. And I want to publish it, and I want people who understand it to read it and argue with it and build on it." He paused. "And I want to teach. I want to find the people who are sitting in maintenance rooms or driving buses or working night shifts with notebooks full of mathematics that nobody has ever asked to see. And I want to show them that the door exists, Doctor." Parker was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said. "That's a good answer. That's a real answer." Another pause. "I have a proposal I would like to make to you." "Not tonight. Tonight you should go home and eat something and sleep. But in the next few days, when you're ready, I would like to talk to you about a position at MIT. A research position, properly funded, with full institutional support. Marcus's hand tightened on his phone. MIT, he said. MIT, she said, where you should have been for the last 17 years. Where the work you were doing before you left was considered important enough that people have been trying to build on it ever since, with limited success because the original thinker wasn't in the room. She paused. You were in the room today, Marcus, and I think it's time to make it permanent. The parking lot was very quiet. I'll call you in 3 days, Marcus said. I'll answer, she said. The call ended. He stood there for another full minute. Then he walked to his car, put the canvas bag in the passenger seat, and drove home. That night, for the first time in 17 years, he slept without a notebook open beside him. The notebooks were on his desk. He knew where they were. But for one night, he let them wait. He had earned one night of not carrying it. 3 days later, the world Marcus inhabited looked measurably different from the one he had woken up in 11 days before. The coverage had not slowed. If anything, the formal announcement of his win and the judge's statement about representing a novel research contribution had intensified it. The video of the final round, someone had recorded it from inside the auditorium, despite the prohibition, had been watched 40 million times. Mathematics professors at universities across the country were using it in their classes, not as inspiration, as a case study in mathematical thinking. The New York Times had run a piece, not on the front page of the main section, but on the front page of the science section, which within the circles that mattered was more significant. The piece was careful and well-researched and made Marcus sound more mythological than he felt. But the core of what it said was accurate. A man with genuine, research-level, mathematical ability had spent 11 years in institutional invisibility because the systems designed to identify talent had been looking in the wrong places. A philosophy professor at Yale wrote an essay that went viral in academic circles about the difference between talent and credentials and the ways institutions confuse the two. 3 separate universities issued statements about their outreach programs for non-traditional candidates. Marcus read very little of this, not from discomfort with attention, but from the simple, practical reality that he had a great deal of thinking to do, and thinking required quiet, and the coverage was not quiet. He called Patricia on the second day and told her he would be in to speak with Glenn at the end of the week about his position. She said, "Does speak with Glenn mean you're leaving?" He said, "It means I'm talking to Glenn." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "He'll be glad to see you. He's been coming in early every day, and I think it's because he's hoping to run into you." On the morning of the third day, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with his third notebook open to the page after the beautiful mistake and the index card correction. The proof that the correction had opened, the one he had glimpsed the shape of that night in the lecture hall, was still unfinished. Not from lack of progress. From the particular kind of discipline that makes you stop when you are tired, because tired mathematics is unreliable mathematics. He was not tired today. He worked for 4 hours. At 11:45, he set down his pen and looked at what he had written. The proof was not complete, but for the first time in 6 years, he could see the end of it. Not vaguely. Specifically, he could see exactly where it needed to go, and approximately how many steps it would take to get there. The path was clear enough to walk. He sat with that for a moment. Then he called Dr. Parker. The conversation lasted 2 hours. She laid out the MIT position in specific terms, not the broad strokes she had offered in the parking lot, but the actual shape of it. A research fellowship with teaching components. A salary that would require him to adjust understanding of what his work was worth. Access to MIT's resources library, computing facilities, research seminars, a network of colleagues whose work intersected with his own. A timeline that was flexible enough to allow him to finish the notebook work before beginning institutional duties. She also told him something he had not known. His original MIT advisor, the man who had written, "Check what you're assuming before you check what you're proving" in the margin of his first proof, was named Professor William Ashby. He had retired 8 years ago. He lived in a house in Vermont, 40 minutes from Dr. Parker's own home. He was 79 years old. He had asked Dr. Parker to pass along a message to Marcus. The message was 4 words: "I always knew it." Marcus held the phone against his ear and said nothing for a moment. "Are you still there?" Dr. Parker asked. "Yes," he said. Tell him I'm coming to see him, if he's willing." "He's been willing for 17 years, she said. Marcus accepted the MIT position at 11:53 on the morning of the 3rd day after the competition. He called Glenn at noon. Glenn answered on the 2nd ring and said, "Before you say anything, I want you to know that this department has been better for having you in it. And I mean that in a way that goes beyond the floors being clean." Marcus said, "Glenn, I'm just saying." "I know," Marcus said. "I'm accepting a research position at MIT. I'll work the rest of this week and next week as my notice. I want to train whoever comes after me properly." Glenn was quiet for a moment. "Did you do that? 2 weeks' notice with training?" "I'm not going to leave floors dirty because something good happened to me," Marcus said. "That's not how this works." Glenn made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. "No," he said. "I don't suppose it is." A pause. "The department is going to be quieter without you." "The floors will still be clean," Marcus said. "That's not what I meant," Glenn said. "I know," Marcus said. "Thank you, Glenn, for the 19 years of giving me a job that let me stay close to the thing I loved." Another silence, longer. "Go do your thing, Marcus," Glenn said. His voice was rough. "Go do your thing." The conversation with Claire was harder. He had known it would be. She requested the meeting formally, through the department secretary, which was itself a kind of message. The professional distance deliberately maintained even now. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10 in her office. Marcus arrived at 9:58. Her office was the same office he had passed 100 times without going inside. He had mopped the hallway outside it. He had emptied the small recycling bin outside her door. He knew the sound her office chair made when she pushed it back from her desk, because he had heard it through the door 100 times. He sat in the chair across from her desk, and she sat behind it, and for a moment they just looked at each other. 2 people who had accumulated a significant amount of shared history in a very short time, and were now figuring out what to do with it. "You accepted Dr. Parker's offer," she said. "Yes." "Good," she said, and she meant it. He could hear that she meant it in the specific way that it costs something to mean a thing genuinely when a part of you would prefer a different answer. "This researched position here," he said. "The one you mentioned at the competition. It's still open," she said. "It will still be open after you've had time to do what MIT offers." "If that's ever relevant," she paused. "I'm not trying to compete with MIT, Marcus. I'm trying to tell you that Whitmore is not closed to you." "I know," he said. "Thank you for that." She looked at her desk for a moment, then back at him. The professional composure was present. It was always present. But underneath it, the thing that had been shifting since the night she stood in the lecture hall doorway at midnight with 2 cups of coffee had shifted further. "I owe you something," she said. "You gave me the key to the proof," he said. "We're even." "That's not what I mean." She pressed on through it. "What I did at the demonstration, the chalk, the joke, the way I—" She stopped. Started again. "I have thought about the fact that I grabbed your arm in front of 200 people and threw chalk on the floor and called it a lesson. I have thought about it a great deal. And I want you to know that I am not. That is not who I am trying to be. That is not who I thought I was. And the fact that I did it means I was wrong about who I was." Marcus looked at her steadily. "Are you apologizing?" "Yes, for which part?" She met his eyes, all of it. "From the beginning. The dismissal in the lecture hall, when you caught the error in my proof. I invited you into the competition to expose you, rather than because I believed in what I'd seen. The chalk, The arm, the joke. She paused. The 17 years that people like me spent maintaining a system that never asked you what you were working on. The last part was the hardest. He could see that it was the hardest, because she says it faster, the way you say something when you know that if you slow down you might stop. That last part isn't yours to apologize for, he said. It is, she said, because I was part of the system. I was part of the mechanism. I sat in faculty meetings and evaluations and hiring committees, and I never once asked whether the criteria we were using were finding everyone they should be finding. That is mine. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I accept your apology, he said, for the chalk and the arm and the competition and the lecture hall. Those are yours to give, and I accept them. She nodded. The larger thing, he said, that's a conversation that's bigger than us. That's going to take longer than an office meeting. I know, she said. I've been thinking about how to be part of that conversation. In a way that's structural, not performative, a program for people who are overlooked by the standard search processes. University workers, community members, people whose resumes have gaps for reasons that have nothing to do with their ability. Marcus looked at her. You've been designing this. Since the night of the competition, she said. I couldn't sleep anyway. He almost smiled. What does it need? Resources, she said. Administrative support, faculty buy-in, and she paused. Cascades. Someone whose voice carries weight in the conversation. Someone who is a credible voice on what overlooked talent actually looks like. She looked at him. Not as an employee of this department, not in any official capacity that creates a conflict. Just as someone who might be willing to talk to this university about what they should be looking for. Marcus thought about the letter from Dr. Parker, about the 4 words from Professor Ashby, about the 32-year-old version of himself in the car, driving to Baltimore with 1 bag and the absolute certainty that he would be back in a few weeks. Send me the program proposal when it's ready, he said. I'll read it. That's enough, she said. That's all I'm asking. He stood to leave. Marcus, she said. He stopped. The notebook work, she said. The 6-year problem. When it's finished and you publish it, I would like to read it. You corrected the error that opened it, he said. You'll be in the acknowledgments. Something moved in Claire Whitmore's face at that. Something unguarded and genuine. Something that had nothing to do with professional distance or competition dynamics, or the careful architecture of academic authority. Just a person hearing something that reached her. Go, she said. Go do your work, he went. The last week and a half at Whitmore University had its own specific texture. Marcus completed his shifts with the same care he always had. He trained the young man Glenn had hired to replace him, a 24-year-old named Darius, who was paying his way through community college and who had, Marcus noticed, a worn paperback mathematics textbook visible in the front pocket of his cart. On Darius's 3rd day, Marcus stopped beside the cart and nodded at the book. What are you studying? He asked. Darius looked slightly caught. Calculus, he said, 2nd course. I'm trying to get into the engineering program. What's giving you trouble? Marcus asked. Darius hesitated. Then, the integration by parts section. The way the textbook explains it doesn't feel like it makes sense to me. Like I can follow the steps, but I don't understand why the steps work. Do you want to understand why before you trust the how? Marcus said. Darius looked at him. Yes, exactly. Marcus stopped his own cart and held out his hand. Darius gave him the textbook. Marcus opened to the relevant section and turned it over. And for the next 22 minutes, standing in the east corridor of the mathematics department of Whitmore University, with mops in a cart beside them, he explained integration by parts to Darius the way he wished someone had explained it to him at 24. Not from the top down, from the inside out, why it worked, what it was actually doing, what the mechanics were in service of. Darius was very still while Marcus talked. The particular stillness of someone whose mind is genuinely receiving something. When Marcus finished, Darius looked at the textbook for a moment. Then he looked up. I've read that section 6 times, he said. You just explained it, and now I understand it. You already understood it, Marcus said. You just needed someone to show you the version that's it as how you think. He handed the book back. Darius held it for a moment. Can I mean, if I get stuck again while you're still here? Yes, Marcus said. Come find me. He picked up his cart and went back to work. He found Darius twice more in the remaining days, and both times he stopped what he was doing and explained whatever was stuck. And both times Darius had the look of someone who had been given something he hadn't quite known he was missing. On Marcus's last day, he found a note in his locker. It was from Darius. It said, I don't know if this is weird to say, but you're the first person who ever made me feel like I could actually do this. Thank you. Marcus read it standing in front of his locker. He thought about the letter from Dr. Parker, about wanting to find the people with notebooks nobody had asked to see. He thought, there they are. They're right here. They're always right here. In the maintenance rooms and the community colleges and the night shifts. They have always been here. The door is the thing. The door is the only thing. He folded Darius's note and put it in the canvas bag with the notebooks. On his last afternoon, Marcus did something he had done on his first afternoon at Whitmore University 11 years ago. He pushed his cart slowly down the main corridor of the mathematics department, past the offices and the seminar rooms and the portraits on the walls, and he looked at everything carefully, not with the feeling of someone leaving, with the feeling of someone who has fully arrived somewhere and is ready, now, to move to the next place. At the end of the corridor was the door to Lecture Hall B, the lecture hall where he had first caught Claire's error, where the graduate students had laughed and then gone quiet, where a small mistake in a boundary condition issued had pulled the first thread in something that had unraveled into this. He opened the door and stood in the doorway. The room was empty. He walked to the board, the same board, his chalk tray. His space. He picked up a piece of chalk. He thought for a moment about what to write. Then he wrote one line. The sentence from his advisor that he had written on the first page of his competition notebook. Begin with what you know to be true. Everything else will follow. He set down the chalk. He looked at the sentence for a moment. Then he left the board as it was. He left the chalk sentence on the board for whoever came next. Whatever student would walk into that room tomorrow and look at the board and wonder who had written it and why. He picked up his cart. He walked out of the lecture hall. He did not look back. He had learned, over 42 years, that the things worth carrying come with you. They don't require looking back. They are already in your hands. He had a canvas bag with 3 notebooks. He had a letter from Dr. Elena Parker and a message from Professor William Ashby. He had a research fellowship at MIT and a sick ear problem that was finally close enough to touch. He had a note from a 24-year-old named Darius in his bag next to the index card with the correction in Claire Whitmore's handwriting. He walked out of Whitmore University at 4:30 on a Thursday afternoon. The documentary crew was still outside. One of the cameras turned toward him. He did not stop walking, but he did not hide either. He had spent 11 years being invisible because it was what the situation required. He did not think it was required anymore. He walked to his car, put the canvas bag on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment. Then he started the engine. The road to MIT was 90 minutes. He had made appointments. He had commitments. He had an unfinished proof that was waiting for him, and a 79-year-old professor in Vermont who had said 4 words that had arrived in Marcus's chest, like something returning from a great distance to its proper place. I always knew it. Marcus pulled out of the parking lot and drove north. The drive to Vermont took longer than Marcus expected. Not because of traffic, because he had never been to Vermont in November, and he had not anticipated what it would feel like to drive through that kind of landscape, in that kind of quiet, with 3 notebooks on the passenger seat, and an address written on a piece of paper on the dashboard, and the specific wait of 90 minutes, alone, with his own thoughts after the most consequential 2 weeks of his adult life. He had called ahead. Dr. Parker had arranged it. Professor William Ashby knew he was coming and had said, according to Dr. Parker, approximately one sentence in response to the news, "Good. Tell him to come for lunch." Marcus had not eaten that morning. He had been too focused on the drive, on the notebooks, on the particular anticipatory nervousness of someone about to see a person who mattered to them enormously after a gap of 17 years. He was not nervous about the mathematics. He was not nervous about the work. He was nervous about the man, about what it would feel like to stand in front of the person who had believed in him most completely and had watched him leave and had never stopped believing even through the long silence. He pulled into the driveway at 11:47. A woman came to the door before he had finished parking. She was in her early 70s with a warm directness in her face that reminded Marcus of Patricia, and she introduced herself as Margaret Ashby and said that William was in the study and that Marcus should come in and that she had made soup because November required soup. Marcus followed her inside. Professor William Ashby was sitting in a chair by the window with a book in his lap and a blanket across his knees and the specific alert stillness of someone who has been waiting for something without letting themselves appear to wait. He was older than Marcus had imagined. 79 was a number, but the reality of it, the white hair, the thinner hands, the way he moved to stand up with the careful deliberateness of a man who has negotiated a particular peace with his own body was something else. But his eyes were exactly the same, sharp and dark, and looking at Marcus with the particular attention of someone for whom paying attention has always been both a professional habit and a genuine act of care. "Sit down," Ashby said, "before we do anything else." "Sit." Marcus sat in the chair across from him. They looked at each other for a moment. 17 years. The distance of it was present in the room, but it was not uncomfortable. It was more like the feeling of setting down something very heavy that you have been carrying for a long time. Not painful, just finally still. "You solved Parker's competition problem," Ashby said. "Yes," Marcus said. "Transformation from below, yes." Ashby nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that approach for 8 years. Knew the territory existed. Couldn't find the entry point." He paused. "You found it." "I had 17 years of walking around in the same territory," Marcus said. From the other side, Ashby looked at him. "The notebooks." "You knew about the notebooks?" "Elena told me. After the competition." He paused. "I want to read them." "They're in the car," Marcus said. Ashby's expression moved toward something that was not quite a smile and was warmer than one. "Course they are," he said. "You drove 4 hours with them on the seat next to you." "I didn't want to check them," Marcus said. Ashby looked at him for a long moment. Then he said the thing he had said in 4 words, through Dr. Parker, this time out loud and in full. "I always knew it, Marcus. From the first proof you handed me, I always knew what was in you." He paused. "I have been sorry every day since November of the year you left that I did not do more, that I did not find you sooner, that I let the distance and the years and the logistics of my own life take precedence over looking harder." Marcus held very still. "You couldn't have found me," he said. "I wasn't looking to be found." "I should have looked anyway," Ashby said. "Maybe," Marcus said, "but I'm here now." Ashby pressed his lips together and nodded once, firmly, the way people do when they have said something important and received something important in return. And the moment requires acknowledgement rather than more words. "Good," he said. "Now go get the notebooks." Margaret made soup. Marcus got the notebooks. They spent 4 hours at the table. Margaret brought soup and bread and coffee, and then removed herself with the quiet grace of someone who knows when a room needs to belong to the people in it. And Marcus and Ashby sat together with the 3 notebooks between, mathemating, and talked about mathematics the way Bossett had not talked about mathematics in 17 years. Not the way he had talked about it with the contestants before the competition. Not the way he had talked about it with Claire in the lecture hall at midnight, which had been real and important, but had also carried its own weight of other things. This was different. This was the particular conversation that happens between a teacher and a student, when the student has grown past being a student, and the teacher has grown past needing to be a teacher, and what's left is two people who both love the same thing and have things to say to each other about it. Ashby read the notebook work with the same focused completeness he had brought to student papers 30 years ago. He did not skim, he did not perform reading, he read. When he reached the beautiful mistake on page 47 of the third notebook, and the index card with Claire's correction tucked beside it, he stopped and looked at the correction for a long time. "Whitmore wrote this," he said. "Yes," Marcus said. Ashby looked at the correction, then at Marcus. She found it. "She looked at the notebooks without asking," Marcus said. "She said she apologized." "She doesn't need to apologize for this," Ashby said. "This is the best thing she could have done." He paused. "She's a good mathematician, Whitmore. I've read her work. She thinks in straight lines, which is both her strength and her limitation. But she finds the real errors. She doesn't paper over them." "No," Marcus said, "she doesn't." Ashby set the index card down carefully. "What happens when you complete the correction through to the end of the proof?" Marcus walked him through it. Verbally at first, then with a piece of paper and a pen that Margaret had produced at some point without either of them asking. He showed Ashby the shape of where the proof was going and the specific remaining steps, and Ashby listened with his eyes half closed the way he always had when he was thinking hardest. And when Marcus finished, Ashby was quiet for full 30 seconds. "How long?" he said. "To finish it, weeks," Marcus said. "Maybe 6, maybe 8. With proper resources." "Less," Marcus said. "With proper resources, maybe 3. Ashby looked at him. "Then let's make sure you have proper resources." And that was how Professor William Ashby, emeritus faculty of MIT, retired for 8 years, came back into the conversation about Marcus Reed's future. Not loudly, not publicly, but through the specific and effective channels of a man who had spent 40 years building relationships with the people who made decisions, and who made one phone call that evening that Marcus did not hear, but whose effects he would feel for years. Marcus drove back to Boston in the dark. He was tired in the specific way of a day that has been full of things that matter. Not exhausted, full. The way a room is full when all the right people are in it. He had left the third notebook with Ashby, not permanently. The old man had asked to read the complete 6-year proof as far as Marcus had taken it, and Marcus had said yes, and handing it over had felt like the mathematical equivalent of introducing someone to a person you love, of letting someone important to you see something that has been private and precious and unfinished. Ashby had held the notebook with both hands and said, "I'll treat it carefully." "I know you will," Marcus said. He had meant it in both senses. The MIT position formally began 6 weeks after the competition. The 6 weeks in between were not quiet weeks. They were the kind of weeks that test whether a person is prepared for the life that has arrived, or only for the version of it they imagined. The coverage had not slowed. Requests of every kind continued to arrive: speaking invitations, interview requests, a book proposal from a literary agent that Marcus read twice before setting aside, not because he wasn't interested, but because the timing was wrong. He needed to finish the work before he talked about the work. That sequence felt important to him in a way he couldn't fully articulate, but trusted completely. The program Claire had been designing at Whitmore moved faster than he had expected. She called him 3 weeks after his last day to tell him the university had approved preliminary funding and that she needed 2 things from him: his name attached to the advisory board in an informal capacity, and 30 minutes of his time to speak to the first cohort of candidates they were considering. He gave her both. The 30 minutes became 90. The first cohort of candidates were 6 people: a security guard with a background in applied mathematics, a hospital orderly who had been working independently on a problem in combinatorics, two community college students whose financial situations had interrupted their academic paths, a retired postal worker who had spent 20 years developing a novel approach to a specific class of scheduling problems, and a woman named Adieze, who worked the night shift at a hotel downtown, and who had, in the folder she brought to the session, 17 years of independent research in number theory. Adieze's folder hit the table, and Marcus looked at it, and felt something move through him so fast and so specifically that he had to breathe through it. 17 years, he looked at Adieze. She was 41. She had the watchful, slightly defended look of someone who has carried something valuable longed for a time, in a world that has not asked to see it. "Tell me what you're working on," Marcus said. She looked at him for a moment, the same look he remembered from his own reflection, the calculation of whether this was real, whether the door that appeared to be opening was actually open, or whether the opening was just a different configuration of closed. Then she opened the folder and began to talk. 20 minutes later, Marcus turned to Claire, who was sitting at the end of the table, and said, "She needs full access. Library, computing, everything, starting now." Claire looked at Adieze's folder, then at Adieze, then back at Marcus. "Done," she said. Adieze looked at both of them. Her defended expression had not entirely left. "Just like that," she said. "Just like that," Marcus said. "The work is real. The work has always been what matters." He paused. "Someone should have said that to you a long time ago. I'm saying it now." Adieze looked at him for a long moment. Then she pressed her lips together and looked at the table, and Marcus recognized that too, the particular way people look away when something they have waited for too long finally arrives. He knew that look from the inside. He let her have the moment without rushing it. The formal beginning of Marcus's MIT position happened on a Monday in early December, in a room he had last been in as a 25-year-old graduate student. The department had arranged a small welcome, not a ceremony, because Marcus had asked for no ceremony, but a gathering of colleagues who wanted to meet him, and a brief introduction for the department chair. Dr. Parker introduced him. She said less than he expected. She did not narrate his story. She did not describe the competition or the video or the 11 years. She said, "Marcus Reed is a research fellow in this department. His work addresses a class of problems that have resisted solution for the better part of a decade. We are fortunate to have him here. I expect he will teach us as much as we teach him." She paused. "Please welcome him, appropriately, which is to say with the full force of your mathematical curiosity." The room had laughed. In humation, and then people came to meet him the way people meet each other in academic mathematics, by asking immediately what he was working on and getting into the specifics within the first minute, because mathematicians, in Marcus's experience, rarely spent more than 30 seconds on pleasantries before getting to the thing that actually interested them. He had forgotten how much he loved that. He had forgotten what it felt like to be in a room full of people for whom the thing he loved most was also their primary mode of existing in the world. He moved through the gathering and talked about his work and asked about theirs, and by the end of the hour his notebook was open, and he had written 3 pages of responses to things he had heard in conversations, because ideas moved fast in rooms like this, and you had to write them down, or they were gone. The proof was finished on a Tuesday evening in late January, 7 weeks into his MIT fellowship, 11 weeks after the competition. It's 17 years and 3 months after he had first begun working on the problem in the margin of a notebook his MIT advisor had given him, in the early days of a graduate program that had ended before it should have. He was alone in his office when it finished. He had been working since 7 that morning. It was 9:42 at night. The final line went onto the page, and he stared at it for a moment, and then he set down his pen and sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and felt the particular stillness of a completed thing. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter and more durable than either of those. He sat with it for about 4 minutes. Then he picked up his phone and called Ashby. The old man answered on the third ring. "Is it done?" he said. No preamble. He had known this call was coming. "It's done," Marcus said. A long silence on the line. "Read me the last step," Ashby said. Marcus read it. Another silence. "That's right," Ashby said quietly. "That's exactly right." A pause. "Do you know what this does? What it opens?" "I have some ideas," Marcus said. "You have more than ideas," Ashby said. "This result, Marcus, this pulls the thread on 3 connected problems that researchers have been approaching from the wrong direction for 15 years. This is not a single solution. This is a new door." Marcus thought about the chalk sentence on the board in Lecture Hall B at Whitmore. "Begin with what you know to be true. Everything else will follow." "I know," he said. "Get some sleep," Ashby said. "Tomorrow you call Elena and you tell her it's ready, and then we begin the process of getting it published properly." And then the old man paused, "and then we see what the world does with it." "Good night, Professor Ashby," Marcus said. "Good night, Marcus," he said. "And then I'm proud of you, not for finishing it, for never stopping." Marcus held the phone after the call ended and sat in his office in the quiet. He thought about his mother's kitchen on Sunday mornings, about the specific warmth of being told that the thing inside you was real and worth the carrying. Some things you wait 30 years to hear again, and when you hear them, you understand that they were always true. The waiting didn't make them more true. It just made you more able to receive them. He put the phone down. He looked at the proof. Then he closed the notebook carefully and put it in his bag and turned off the office light and went home. The paper was submitted for peer review in February. The peer review process, which in academic mathematics can take months or years, moved unusually fast. Not because corners were cut. Because the reviewers who received the paper, 3 of them, anonymous, according to standard practice, responded with a velocity that the journal editor later described, in a conversation with Dr. Parker, as unprecedented in his 20 years of editing the publication. The first reviewer sent comments back in 11 days. The comments were 4 pages long and contained exactly 1 substantive critique, which Marcus addressed in 2 paragraphs, and 14 separate observations that amounted to various formulations of the same underlying statement. This is significant work. The second reviewer took 3 weeks and said, in the final paragraph of their review, something that Marcus read twice when Dr. Parker forwarded it to him. "This proof should have been published 15 years ago. The fact that it wasn't is a failure of the systems we use to find work like this, not a failure of the work itself." The third reviewer was the most thorough and the most rigorous and the most demanding, and Marcus was grateful for all 3 of those things, because they meant the paper, when it emerged from review, was as clean and as defended as it was possible to be. The third reviewer's final comment was brief, "Except without further revision. This is the real thing." The paper was accepted for publication in April. Marcus found out on a Wednesday afternoon from an email that arrived while he was in a teaching session with 4 first-year graduate students who were working through a problem in optimization theory. He saw the email arrive on his phone, read the subject line, set the phone face down on the desk, and continued the teaching session for 40 more minutes without mentioning it. When the students left, he sat in the empty room and read the email properly. Then he called Patricia. She answered immediately. "Tell me something good," she said, which was how she answered the phone now when she saw his name. "The paper was accepted," he said. The sound she made was not a word. It was something that meant more than a word. "Patricia," he said, when she had been quiet for a moment. "I'm here," she said. I'm very happy for you, Marcus. I've been happy for you since October, but this is a different kind of happy." "How's Darius?" Marcus asked. "Still here," she said. "He passed his calculus final, highest score in the class. He asked me last week if I thought you'd come back sometime and talk to the staff." "Tell him yes," Marcus said. "Tell him I'll come in June." "I'll tell him," she said. She paused. He'll be very glad to hear that. After the call, Marcus sat for another minute in the empty classroom. Then he opened his notebook to a fresh page. The work was never done. A completed proof was a door opened, not a door closed. There were 3 problems that Ashby had identified as connected, and Marks had been thinking about all 3s since the night he finished the main proof, and his notebooks were already full of preliminary exploration. He picked up his pen. He worked for 2 hours. The publication date was set for the 3rd week of May. The week before it, something happened that Marcus had not anticipated. Professor William Ashby called him on a Thursday and said, "I'm coming to Boston." Marcus paused. "Professor, Elena is driving me," Ashby said. "I'm not driving myself. I'm not an idiot. I'm coming to Boston because there is going to be a moment when that paper is formally presented at your institution, and I intend to be in the room." He paused. "I was in the room at the beginning. I want to be in the room now." Marcus did not argue. "When?" "Saturday," Ashby said. "Margaret is coming too. She wants to see where you work." "I'll make sure there's good coffee," Marcus said. "She'll appreciate that," Ashby said. "She has high standards about coffee." "I've been hearing about it for 43 years. They arrived on Saturday morning. Dr. Parker had arranged a small informal presentation in one of the seminar rooms. Nothing formal, nothing ceremonial. Just the department gathered to hear Marcus walk through the key elements of the paper before its public release. The room held about 40 people. Every seat was taken. Marcus stood at the board. Ashby was in the front row. Margaret beside him. Dr. Parker to his left. Several of the graduate students he had been working with since December. 2 of the colleagues who had come to meet him at his welcome gathering and had since become, in the way that happens in mathematics departments when people genuinely connect over work, something more like friends. And in the back row, which Marcus noticed when he was setting up and which he had not expected, Claire Whitmore. She had driven from Whitmore University to MIT on a Saturday morning without telling him she was coming. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the direct, clear attention she brought to everything, and she gave him a single small nod that said, "I'm here. Go ahead." He turned to the board. He walked the room through the proof, not the abbreviated journal-ready version, the real version, the version that showed the terrain and the failed paths and the beautiful mistake, and the index card and the transformation from below, and the 6 years of working in the dark by feel, and what it felt like when the final line went onto the page at 9:42 on a Tuesday night in January. He talked for an hour and 20 minutes. The room was completely silent for most of it. Not the polite silence of people tolerating a presentation. The active silence of people who are fully inside something. When he finished, Ashby was the first person to speak. He said, "Questions? Who has questions?" And the room erupted. Because it was a room full of mathematicians, and they had questions. They had many questions. The questions were sharp and specific, and some of them were challenges, and some of them were extensions, and some of them were the particular kind of question that is really a statement of excitement, wearing a question mark for formal propriety. Marcus answered every one. He was at the board for another 40 minutes after the presentation ended, fielding questions and drawing diagrams and following threads that people pulled, and it was in those 40 minutes that he felt, in the most complete way he had felt it since October, the thing he had stayed close to for 11 years through the walls of a building. He was home, not at MIT specifically, not in Boston, not in any physical place. He was home in the way that people are home when they are doing the work they were made to do, in the company of people who understand what that work means, without apology or disguise or the need to diminish themselves to fit the space available. He was home in himself. After the session in the hallway, Ashby found him and pressed his hand between both of his own. "Well," the old man said, "he didn't add anything to it." "Well," Marcus agreed. Margaret Ashby hugged him, which he hadn't expected, and said, William talked about you for years after you left. He never used your name because he's William, and he protects people's privacy, even when they're not in the room. But I knew who he meant. I always knew who the student was that he was talking about. Marcus looked at Ashby. You talked about me? I talked about a problem, Ashby said. The problem of a person with extraordinary ability who disappears from the structures designed to support that ability. It happened to keep using you as its primary illustration. For 17 years, Margaret said. The problem was persistent, Ashby said. Marcus looked at the old man for a moment. Then he said, Thank you for not giving up on the problem. Thank you for solving it, Ashby said. Claire found him later, in the small kitchen down the hall from the seminar room where he had gone to get coffee and stand in quiet for 4 minutes. She knocked on the open door, and he said, Come in, and she came in and stood across the small room from him, with her coat over her arm because she had been planning to leave, but had not left. You drove up from Boston, he said. I drove up from Boston, she agreed. You didn't tell me you were coming. I wasn't certain I was coming until I was already driving, she said, which I recognize is not a completely rational decision-making process. No, he said, but it's a human one. She looked at him for a moment. The presentation, she said. The way you walked through it. The way you explained the terrain before the proof. The way you showed the room why it mattered before you showed them what it was. She paused. I've been to a great many mathematical presentations in my life. That was the best one I've ever attended. Because of the mathematics, he asked. Because of the person doing the mathematics, she said. Because the person doing the mathematics was completely himself. No performance, no armor, just the work and the thinking and the honesty about the path it took to get there. She held his gaze. I have never been completely myself in a presentation. I have always been the version of myself I decided was appropriate for the room. You can learn, he said. I know, she said. I'm trying. She paused. The program at Whitmore. The first cohort is beginning formal work next week. A DA's presented her preliminary findings to a faculty seminar last Tuesday. How did it go? Marcus asked. 2 faculty members want to collaborate with her on a joint paper, Claire said. She sat in that room and answered every question with the same completeness you just answered questions in there. She never apologized for herself once. A pause. She told me afterward that she'd been practicing. She'd been watching your competition video and practicing the way you answered questions. Marcus was quiet for a moment. She doesn't need to practice being me, he said. She needs to practice being her. I told her that, Claire said. She said, and I'm quoting exactly, I know. But watching someone who looks like where I came from stand in a room like that and not apologize, it showed me the room was possible. That's what I was practicing. Marcus held that for a moment. Set it somewhere inside him where it would stay. How many in the next cohort? He asked. We're looking at 12, she said. The applications came in faster than we expected. We're still reviewing. She paused. I wanted to ask you something. The June visit you mentioned to Patricia. When you come to Whitmore to talk to the staff. Yes. Would you be willing to talk to the program candidates as well? Informally. Not a presentation, just a conversation. Yes, he said without hesitating. She looked at him. Just like that, he said. It's the most important conversation I can have. Everything else I do, the research, the teaching, the paper, it matters. But that conversation matters in a different way. In the way that changes the starting conditions for someone else. He paused. Which means it multiplies. Claire was quiet. What you said at the competition, she said. When you took the marker from my hand, you didn't say anything. You just took it and started writing. She paused. I think about that moment a lot. What it must have taken. To take the marker from my hand in that room, with all those people watching, after everything. It didn't take anything, Marcus said. That's what I want you to understand. It didn't take courage or defiance or any of the things the story has made it into. I picked up the marker because I could see the solution, and the board was there. That's all. She shook her head slowly. You're wrong, she said. It took 17 years. It just looked like a single moment. He thought about that. He thought it was probably both things at once. Safe drive back, he said. Thank you, she said. She moved toward the door, then stopped. Marcus. Yes. She looked at him with the expression that had been developing since October, the one that had started as uncomfortable curiosity and become, through the specific events of 4 months, something layered and genuine, and still in the process of finding its final shape. I'm glad you walked through that door, she said. The lecture hall door, that afternoon in October. So am I, he said. She left. He stood in the small kitchen for another minute. Then he picked up his coffee and walked back toward the seminar room, where several of the graduate students were still gathered around a section of the board, where someone had written an extension of one of the proof's implications, and people were arguing about it with the productive intensity of people who are genuinely trying to figure something out. He stood in the doorway and listened for a moment. One of the students, a 23-year-old named Leo, who had the same quality Marcus had recognized in Darius, the hunger to understand not just the how, but the why, looked up and said, Professor Reed, come look at this. We think there's something here. Professor Reed, the first time anyone at MIT had called him that. The title landing so naturally in Leo's voice that it clearly had not occurred to the young man that it might be the first time. Marcus walked to the board. He looked at what they had written. He picked up the chalk, and he began. That was May. By September, the paper had been cited 47 times in 6 months, a velocity that the journal tracked as among the fastest for any mathematics publication in the past decade. The 3 connected problems Ashby had identified were the subject of a new seminar at MIT that Marcus co-led with Dr. Parker. 6 researchers from 4 universities had reached out to collaborate. Az published her first formal paper in August. Marcus was in the acknowledgments. Claire was in the acknowledgments. In the paper's introduction, Adiezi wrote one sentence that circulated widely in the weeks after publication. The most important resource in mathematics is not funding or facilities or institutional support. It's being seen by someone who knows how to look. Darius passed his engineering program entrance exam in July. He texted Marcus the same night with the score and 3 words after it, "You showed me." Marcus texted back, "You showed yourself. I just held the light for a minute." Professor Ashby read the final published paper in his chair by the Vermont window, with Margaret bringing him tea in the quiet of a November afternoon. And when he finished the last page, he closed the journal and sat with his eyes closed for a while. And Margaret, who knew him well enough not to ask, simply sat in the chair across from him and let him be in whatever he was in. After a while, he opened his eyes and said, "It's everything I thought it would be." "The paper?" she said. "The paper," he said, "and the person." In December, 1 year after the competition, Marcus stood at the front of a lecture hall at MIT and looked out at a room of 40 students, first year and advanced, traditional path and not, from everywhere and every background that mathematics had ever drawn people from, and he felt the particular fullness that had been building since October of the previous year, and was now something durable and settled. He picked up the chalk. He wrote one line on the board. The same line he had written on the board at Whitmore University on his last afternoon before walking away and not looking back. Begin with what you know to be true. Everything else will follow. He turned to face the room. That sentence was written in the margin of my first proof by a man who is 79 years old and still the best mathematical thinker I have ever met, he said. It is the most useful thing anyone has ever said to me about mathematics. It is also the most useful thing anyone has ever said to me about being a person in the world. He paused. We are going to work on hard problems in this room. We are going to fail at some of them, and we are going to succeed at others, and we are going to learn the most important lessons from the failures. I want you to understand from the beginning that failure is not the opposite of progress. In mathematics, failure is usually the shape of progress, viewed from the wrong angle. He looked at the room. What do you know to be true? He said. Not what have you been told, not what are you supposed to say. What do you actually know, in the way that means something to you, that you would stake the next part of your work on? He waited. Think about it. Take a minute. Then we'll begin. The room went quiet. 40 people thinking, genuinely, about what they knew. Marcus stood at the board with the chalk in his hand and looked at them and felt the thing he had spent 17 years staying close to through walls and hallways and notebooks in a maintenance locker. He was in the room now. He had always been meant to be in the room. And the room, it turned out, had always been waiting for him, not the room at Whitmore with its specifics board and its chalk tray and the ghost of a joke that had changed everything. Not the room at MIT with its institutional gravity and its 40 years of great work in the walls, but the room itself. The room that exists wherever a person picks up the chalk and turns to face the people in front of them and says, "Here is what I know. Let's find out what we can build from it." Marcus Reed picked up his chalk and began to teach, and everything else followed.